Topic one. The U.S. Currently is experiencing a housing crisis and an affordable housing crisis. Excuse me. Rents have been rising in many cities, which sorry, Okay, sorry. The rents have been rising in many cities, and which eats up more and more of our tenants' income. So, as part of the plan to address this, should the U.S. create a rent control scheme in all 50 states and massively increase the number of properties that fall under these guidelines? Or is this too much of a burden on landlords and an unreasonable limit on their profits? Thanks so much. Sorry, I got heavily distracted in my DMs. Sorry, it happens. You get surprise messages. All right, so we'll start. We'll do a 1 minute intro for each of you. So let's go to Catarana.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to go ahead and implement rent control. I think of for having a functioning and healthy society, going ahead and having people literally just work to be able to live in their cardboard box houses doesn't make very much sense. So having rent control would really help go with uh, first of all the fact that we're not having increased wages and also allowing people to do proper budgeting to figure out like what do they need to have to go ahead and pay for and going having like most of your income just go towards whether or not you can have a place to store your bed is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I think rent control is a good idea for those reasons.
Thanks so much. Killer.
So this is where I have to be a dirty centrist, where my asshole hurts from the fence post being rammed up it so hard. But with rent control, it can be helpful because your goal ultimately is to limit the amount of money that landlords are making. If people are making quite a bit of money, landlords can then demand more money. But landlords also need to spend so much money a month on maintenance and other things. And if you cut below what they need to spend for maintenance, then the quality of life, the housing that people are living with or living in and stuff like that starts to degrade. So ha- it would have to be a very amazing policy, very well thought out for rent control to actually work. It's not really hitting the underlying issue of like how much money are landlords allowed to ask for or take from their expenses for any place that they rent.
Okay. Thanks so much. Counterpoints.
Can you hear me now? Penis mic check. That's a yes.
No,
all right, cool.
No, right.
Okay, all right. So basically, I have a cool reason for my audio being fucked up, which is my dog bumped into all my electronics. So I'll take that as a problem.
Okay, likely excuse. Sure.
All right.
Getting my homework too. Yeah, it feels good.
Yeah. But my name's Connor. I run a YouTube channel named CounterPoints. I'm centrist, center right, and a Marine veteran, law enforcement veteran, and a nerd. So in reference to this topic specifically, I think that what we really need to do is talk about urban planning. I think that rent control is just slapping a Band-Aid on this thing. I know that high density housing is a passion topic for a lot of lefties. And the reason why is because you need to have enough housing for people to live in these urban areas. That way they can contribute to their society. Not only that, this actually ties back into a subject that we talked about last week, where we were saying or a few weeks ago, where we were talking about whether or not suburbs were bullshit. Yeah, like I defended suburbs, but on some level they're bullshit, and you should be able to walk and you should be able to ride your bike, and it should be an option. I love cars. I'm going to love cars until the day I die. That being said, our cities are planned like shit, and I'll leave it there.
Okay. Xenon?
Yeah, I agree with much of what Counterpoints has said. Urban planning is a huge part of this problem. And of course, just the fact that you can profit from housing is also a large part of it too. As long as people can make money off it, they're gonna do everything they can to maximize their profit, regardless of who is hurt. That's a part of the issue with capitalism in general. If we start building, large scale, dense housing units that were rent controlled, especially if they're mixed income and that sort of thing, that would be definitely a very good thing.
Thanks so much. Synth.
Nationwide rent control would probably be really good. But I can't imagine how we would get there and actually calculate out at what levels we like price individual properties and actually have it be fair for each place. that would be a massive amount of work that I'm not sure the government would do. And it seems like the rent control that goes in right now, from what I know, isn't really all that great for like lower income people. So expanding it at the current moment and how it is would probably be bad. But actually implementing like a nationwide rent control where we could control for all these variables would of course be like a really great thing, because it would allow a lot of people a lot more financial mobility.
Dear Mama.
Yeah, I think that rent control is a band-aid solution to a problem that is a gushing wound. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't necessarily oppose it, except I do think that there is some meaningful critique in that it necessitates the existence of a housing market and of landlords. The problem that I have is that landlords don't really do anything. People will say they do maintenance. They usually drag their feet on that and then also over report how much they actually spend on it. And in addition, many of them, the entire housing and renting industry is rife with just outright fraud that no one has the time or money to actually contest. It is a widespread issue, and it seems like nobody's interested in chasing it down either, because those landlords, they're lucrative. We have entire cities that are increasingly made up of Airbnbs. So I think we need to address this problem at a larger level than just rent control. However, I do think that rent control can be a good step in the right direction, provided that it is not the end goal. I think that it is an absolute atrocity that we have the housing crisis in our country that we do to the same degree. There is a deliberate effort of corporations to lock my generation, specifically millennials, out of housing, out of affordable housing, like owning our own properties forever. They would like to have us renting forever. And I would like to talk about that more as we get into this. But that's my general position on this topic. I'm interested to bounce ideas back and forth with everybody here.
Thanks so much. And Demon Mama, of course you did. You took this topic to where I was going to take it one way or the other about landlords in general, but we'll get there later on. First, though.
Oh, yes, we will.
Of course, it was going to happen. It was going to happen. All right, next, Amy. Love to hear what you have to say about this, and take a little bit more time if you want to, give your opinion.
Sure. Rent control is a neoliberal policy prescription to the capitalist hegemonic standard that we have put into place by even our more democratic presidents, that has forced us to become consumers in a market that is privatized and for profit. If we're going to address this, we have to look at how important it is to reinstitute a robust public housing model that requires public policy that's broken down at the state level. Our housing market is determined by our regional economy. The reason why we can't necessarily pin down the exact amounts of rent control standards applied to each economy is because various cities who are doing really well, they have the justification to raise rents based on market demand. That's the reason why you have rent control standards like here in California that's based on a formula of CPI plus 5% of inflation, because more people are moving into areas that are seemingly too expensive to allow for everyone to live comfortably. And that is the reason why the suburbs have become such a widespread alternative. Zoning does play a huge role in building any new housing within the city proper. But in terms of why rent control is so problematic, it's because we do not have enough political will involved in looking at whether or not affordable housing is the right solution, or we need to shift towards a public housing model that is based on income that is available for everyone. Equity is something that has been missing from our public housing model for a while, and our affordable housing is pretty much a joke at this point. So why is the rent control question so hard to answer? That's because we don't have enough politicians at the local level speaking out about the need to expand housing stock that does not allow for people to spend over 30% or more on their budget. In fact, the average renter does pay around 37% of their income on monthly expenses for housing, and it's become normalized to overspend to keep a roof over your head. And that will not change so long as the government continues to outsource our housing to the private for-profit market. It has to be a major shift in increasing our public housing stock. That's the only way a rent control standard would even be feasible at this point. And that would be to control for the rent in housing units that would be, distributed to more of those middle income or higher income earners who don't necessarily need to have equitable housing, but then want to have the choice to live in more luxury apartments with, amenities that would go beyond a standard baseline quality of life provided by, the government. If we could shift to a more equitable housing model.
Before we go to our last person who's just joined us, and we're happy to have them, I should have mentioned this previously, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Amy. There's two schemes. There's rent control, which is technically freezing your rent, and then there's rent stabilization, which is what most people think is rent control, which is limiting how often, or the amount that rent can rise. Correct? Like year after year.
Rent control and rent freezes, they have been one and the same, but yeah, stabilization is more so based on the amount of rent that can be charged relative to inflation. Okay. So you won't be hit with exponential rises in rents, and typically those standards apply to houses that are 15 years or older. And the reason why the formula looks to older housing stock is because it's assuming that if you are a landlord, you have paid off the vast majority of the mortgage on these buildings, and then any rent that you are receiving, especially after you have paid off the mortgage, then that is money that's going directly into your pocket. So the amount of exploitation, there's actually a term for this. It was coined a few years ago. It's called tenant exploitation, where you're charging your tenants more than the value of your property. And the money that you are pocketing is not going toward your mortgage. It should be going toward upkeep and maintenance because of the depreciation that would be, happening in your unit. And that's not necessarily happening. Older buildings that no longer have a mortgage, sometimes tenants are paying way more and receiving less, and that's because the landlords no longer have to pay the mortgage. They are paying property taxes and then paying for the bare minimum when it comes to maintenance. And that's the reason why the justification is made on those older housing units, because there's a lot more money that can be made in excess that is pocketed if there is no mortgage that's being paid.
Thanks so much. Thank you for helping clear that up. All right, now let's go to our last individual, and thank you for being here, buddy. Nice to see you once again.
Nice to see you too, my friend.
Layman hasn't cured his Canadianness, but still.
I never will, my friend. I never will.
I love you anyway.
Shining and glistening as ever, my friend.
I love you despite it, not because of it. Okay.
I know.
Layman, thank you for joining us. Take a moment to introduce yourself, and then you can talk about the first topic, which is the rent control discussion.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Layman. As you can tell, I am an anarcho-authoritarian Canadian. Both of those things at the same time, as always. Happy to be back. Happy to be chatting with everybody once again. Happy to be involved in the discourse. I have a YouTube channel where I post political shit and the occasional video essay or whatever, under the same name. Yep, under the same name. So that's me, and happy to be back. As far as rent control goes, you were asking if it's effective at assisting with affordable housing, right? Mm-hmm. That was the question. Yeah. So most evidence that I've seen on rent control basically says that it helps in the short term but it's bad in the long term. So in the long term, it helps affordability in the short term. In the long term, it decreases affordability, fuels gentrification, and creates negative externalities on the surrounding neighborhood. There was also a study from Econ Watch from like 2009. It was a literature review. It found that if you factor in like housing availability, maintenance, housing quality, rental rates, political and administrative costs, and redistribution for both first generation and second generation rent control systems, that the economic field, it's like one of the study said it was like one of the rare times where it basically reached a consensus saying that like rent control just creates more problems with affordable housing than it solves. So yeah, like that's just what I've read so far. That's just the data that I've seen so far. So that's why I'm not a big rent control guy. I think there's other ways to curtail the housing crisis, the housing issue that we can get into in the open discussion, perhaps.
All right, well, we'll get into that right now. Open to everyone.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, like, here in Quebec, we have a lot of renters' rights. So, for example, your rent cannot be increased at all if you live in a unit unless there's actually been some form of work done to your unit. So, if they went ahead and renovated your kitchen, okay, they can raise your rent. But otherwise, they can't raise it. So, some people have been living in the same unit for 15 years, still paying $500. Now, is that particularly great for whoever's the person that's the landlord? Probably not for profits, but it also makes sense to me that they shouldn't be able to raise your rent because it's like, literally, what have you done beyond unclogging my drain every once in a while? So I don't know, with that, I kind of I think rent control is really good because especially for a lot of people that like move into cities for like temporary purposes, move just for university. It's been really great for us not having to worry about our rent being raised by $100 every year.
Yeah, so Katarana, like the problem with this is that like it does, like theoretically and like immediately that is true and that does sound good, but most of the data that I've seen says that this only happens, generally speaking, just empirically so in the short term, not in the long term, and it makes, you know, affordability worse in the long term. And so while it is like, you know, nice obviously to have lower rent, the problem is that there's a broader issue with housing affordability that those sorts of policies don't attenuate.
Well, the other problem that you run into with a lot of this, and you see this with, like when I was taking economics 1 and 2, they were bringing up pitfalls of capitalism, and one of them is rent control. One of the studies that one of the cases that we studied was New York City's rent control. And yes, your housing quality doesn't necessarily change at the very beginning, which is what Layman's saying. But as time goes on, so if the rent control is not properly adequate or properly adjusted, and it cuts under what it requires to maintain the place, then the place's quality of life is deteriorating, and the landlord or whoever is responsible of maintaining it, updating, and fixing all the problems can't actually afford it. So then you start living in, or the quality of life starts deteriorating. And that's why I said at my opening statement, it's all based around if you can somehow figure out how much a landlord should be making and you somehow hit that magic number.
Let's
You
get
have to
I'm very-
predict the future for that too, wouldn't you? That's what it sounds
I mean,
like.
I'm very happy that
DemonMama and Counter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm very happy that we've had a couple of people bring up the sort of quality of life discussion. One of the things that I think gets lost in a lot of conversations about housing is that it is an immediate need for the vast majority of people who are affected by housing issues, by housing insecurity, by housing affordability, or by housing availability. In fact, I really hate the terminology affordable housing because honestly, I don't know. Sometimes I go on the internet and I look at politics and I just find myself wondering, like, what do we think like a country or a nation is even supposed to be? And if your country is not designed in such a way that you can get housing to the people that live in that country, that is by default going to weaken your country. It is going to weaken your structures. And we get so far away from this by talking about like housing affordability. Why is this even the discussion? Why are we talking?
Well, what you just said isn't mutually exclusive though, right? If you can't afford a house, then you can't co-inhabit the house, like you just said, right?
What?
Like
No, I'm saying that I think that it's kind of silly that we focus on housing affordability when what we should actually be asking is, do we have enough houses right now? And if we do, why aren't people living in them? And I think that we do need to address that. And of course, it is going to bring us inevitably to the great question of the landlords, who, for the record, are a blight on our society and should have been gone out of vogue when we got rid of all of the other types of lords, when we stopped being monarchists, because landlords don't do anything that couldn't be replaced by basically any other entity. You could literally have a community land trust. You could have housing co-ops. You could have a completely state-run solution that would do exactly as well as private landlords, if not better. But the bottom is exactly the same spot. The bottom for landlords and the bottom for state is exactly the same. The thing is that landlords never do a good job. I don't know anyone, and this is a little bit anecdotal because I don't know that this has ever been studied, but I don't know anybody who's had a landlord that they were like, man, my landlord really takes good care of my place. No, it's usually a process of, oh, my landlord sold my place and now the repairs are all backed up and they lost all the paperwork. And now I'm waiting for a repair for 4 months, or I have 4 tickets like I currently have for maintenance. That's rather important. And this happens all over the place. So I think the problem that we run into is that people look at rent control as a way to alleviate the immediate concerns. But I honestly do think that we should be more aggressive about this. I think that we need to seriously reanalyze the way that we look at housing. And the fact that like we literally every single day acknowledge that shelter is a human need, but then we continue to charge like a huge chunk of everybody's income. And for those people who don't have income, or for those people who might be disabled, potentially all of their income, and they might not even end up with a place, is pretty bad, especially when we have just an incredible amount of vacant properties, especially in urban areas that aren't being used. And yeah, I guess that I would agree in that I don't think that rent control is like a long-term solution by any means. And again, the same problem that I mentioned before, it necessitates a private market like hook, which I don't think should be done for something like housing. But I can understand why people find it an attractive policy when they're facing not having a house, especially with the numbers of evictions and threats of evictions that we saw throughout the whole pandemic.
Let's go to counterpoints, and then Killer and Layman.
Layman after Counter. He raised his hand.
Yeah, I know, but he was talking before, so I'm doing. Don't worry, I got the order. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
All right, counterpoints. Killer, Layman, Cut.
Connor, you're muted, bud.
Boy, he's so like more of your dog, I'm sure, right? More of your dog.
Well, no, fuck today. No, it's my computer. All right, so we can hear me now. Penis mic check.
Oh,
all right,
boy.
good. All right, so
So true.
All right, so the point is, y'all have already brought up a lot of points. One of the things that was kind of frustrating for me that Killer kind of pointed out was like, oh well, the problem with rent control is to attenuate it to the market forces. That way we can you know what we call this? We just call this fucking market forces. And I'm not digging on you, Killer, but this is like I don't know, looking for a problem to solve another fucking problem. Like the solution, I hope we're all familiar with basic economics of supply and demand. So if there's a demand problem, then we need to up the supply. So whether we're talking about rezoning housing, creating high density housing, rethinking the way that we do cityscapes, rethinking how we build new cities, these are all things that we need to do in order to balance supply and demand. Now, here's where I'm sympathetic to rent control. Some cities, like New York City, some cities like Los Angeles, are completely reliant on a subservient working class that they pay menial wages, and they force those people to increasingly commute longer and longer distances because they don't give a fuck about whether or not these people have access or if they have like a 4-hour commute. In this respect, I think that zoning could do a better job of saying like, hey, we're going to have housing that is built for our middle class and our working class. That way they can actually afford to work in the city that they support through their labor. I think that's an intelligent thing to do. But when we're talking about like, I don't know, completely nationalizing the housing market or something like that, like this is where if we want to talk about it like philosophically or ideologically, we can do that. From a pragmatic standpoint, I think we're just not on the same playing field, and I'll leave it there.
Killer.
I mean, that's part of the discussion about what is or what isn't pragmatic is I think that's important, right? Like if we were to go by pure pragmatism, there would be no, like, you could argue that no reform is truly pragmatic because it is more pragmatic to just stay with the status quo. I think that there are times where we have to take the more difficult path of serious radical reform or completely revolutionizing an industry, or else we could end up getting stuck with something that just grinds people into dust, which I think is what we have now.
Sure. And then I'll be very brief, but basically, like, my appeal would be oftentimes I wish Drew Welty was here because I think people need to appeal to motivated reasoning. He talked about that a lot. I think you can get engineers, city planners, government officials, capitalists, landlords. I think you can get all of those people on the same page if you're saying from a utilitarian calculus, we can maximize everybody's well-being, including the employees that you need in order to run your institutions, and also how the city functions itself. I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Killer, Layman, Cat.
I don't know why you were necessarily shitting on me or like why you said that. I mean, to me, there's a lot of things that are at play, and it ultimately ends up falling on who owns the housing or the development, which in this modern case is just the landlord. We can switch hands to whatever person, but I mean, even things like the tax for the property tax. You think you think the landlord's paying for that shit? No, they're just passing it straight on to the renter. So we can even talk about tax systems and stuff like that. All I guess I see, which you are right, that you could just increase the supply of rent and stuff like that. But landlords, in the end of the day, are going to try to get as much money as they can out of their renters. And renters are going to pay for a place if, once they exclude all the other required necessities for living, like food, internet, utilities, and other things. If they're still going to pay for a place that's slightly more expensive if they can afford it. And so they're just going to keep on bumping up the rent until it reaches that equilibrium.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think we agree here, and I wasn't trying to poop on you, unless you want me to.
I love getting shit on.
So the point being that equilibrium that you're talking about or whatever is basically like that we call that market equilibrium. It's more philosophical than it is literal because it's always fluctuating all of the time. But at the same time, what's going on there is landlords. I understand there's a incentive for renters to always look for housing that they like, that they can afford, and there's always an incentive for landlords to get as much money as possible. But there is an equilibrium here, and it's not the landlord's just going to charge like $8,000 a month, because unless there's a market of people who can afford $8,000 a month, then nobody's going to rent that fucking unit. So basically, like, they have to come up with something that their people can actually afford.
Right,
Except
but
there's a wrench in that. There's a small wrench in that,
okay.
And that's what I brought up with regard to Airbnb. Which, if you've ever been to San Francisco, you will know that there are indeed an unbelievable amount of properties that go for rents that are just abominably high, like laughably high, like literally $8,000 a month rent for just like a place, and that's because they are selling those to wealthy travelers who are just looking for a novel place to stay and are willing to pay. Oh yeah, I'm only going to be there for a week or 2 weeks. Oh yeah, I'll pay $4,000 for that. Whatever, it's nothing. And then they leave. And then the people who live there are homeless. And that's like a serious issue. Like, I mean, I've just, out of curiosity, when I visited San Francisco, I just decided to go through Airbnb and see how many houses in a neighborhood that I was staying with somebody in were currently listed on Airbnb, and it was almost all of them. It's ridiculous how many buildings are just changing themselves rapidly to chase this Airbnb trend. And I think that's something that, like, the market doesn't really address very well with regard to housing. Is like, not only is it a problem of like gentrification, it's a problem of like remote gentrification by rich people from other places.
Sure, but rent control increases gentrification in the long term.
Do you mind just like explaining that? And again, I just want to
okay, so I'm not an economist, There's data to suggest this that I can link in the chat if you like. That's just an observation of like the long-term effects of the policy.
Yeah,
So
I
just
mean,
give
of
me a
course, I'd
second,
be
I'll put it
interested
in
in
the
that
chat.
in the long run. Like I'd be interested in researching that, because I would be very interested in what the like mechanism by which that happens. Gentrification is like an incredibly aggressive process.
Just out of
Oh my
curiosity,
goodness.
is the data that you are talking about the study that came from San Francisco that was looking at the impact of rent control based on the lowered supply of housing stock over the course of a couple years, and how
This is from a researcher named Blair Jenkins. It was published in the Journal of the American Institute for Economic Research. It was a literature review of a lot of different rent control policies across the U.S. I don't think it was just looking at San Francisco.
Apologies about that interruption there. Somebody was dragging some huge piece of machinery past my house, and it like totally distracted me. I just wanted to say, yeah, I don't entirely like again, my position is not that like rent control is a long-term solution. Just that I think that I understand where people are coming from, and I think that it could do some good. And also, I think that was everything.
And
Sorry,
to level
apologies.
with you, DemonMama, like it does do good in the short term. That's what the data I've seen suggests. My problem isn't that though that it's good in the short term, but then doesn't have effects in the long term or has like neutral effects. My issue is that it has negative effects. That's my issue with it, because I want
think
to be able to
that's,
solve housing long term. Now, I'm not principally opposed to things like social housing. I just think that there's like a lot of other things you have to do, right? So like,
I think social housing is like the best answer. Like it cuts around a lot of the issues with rent control. However, I wonder, and of course, like some of this is going to be very hard to determine, but I wonder if it's the way that rent control is implemented that actually leads to some of the negative outcomes. I mean, after all, a lot of policies are sort of like getting a ball rolling, and if you set it up in such a way and it rolls down into negative outcomes, that would not be very good. But I don't know. I don't know enough about how it affects gentrification. If I was to just take a guess at it, my guess would be that that there are landlords who are able to do these sort of strange upgrades and whatever in order to sneak their way to raise the rent, and then that contributes to gentrifying, which would be terrible. And I agree that like I don't think that any single housing policy is going to fix the whole problem. There probably needs to be multiple in conjunction.
Tons, yeah. It's so complicated, yeah.
So let's go to Kat,
yeah.
and then Counter, and then Danny, and Xenon, and then Amy. All right. It's Kat.
Okay. Yeah, there's this whole thing about if we have rent control, buildings are going to go ahead and fall into this disarray, and that you need to go ahead and have these prices consistently change so that things are able to be upgraded. I'm not sure any of you have lived in a unit in which it's being consistently, the price is being raised over and over. They never end up tricking out your apartment. Like I've never seen these upgrades, like, this crazy upgrades that they're going ahead and putting in because of all the additional income that they're getting. Like to me, it seems like it just leads to more people ignoring whether or not my dishwasher is broken, more than this sudden increase in upgrade and just the quality of the maintenance that you're getting. Like we hardly get maintenance as it is, and with all these different units that are being raised even in the high price regions, do you see these apartment buildings just being upgraded, and that they're doing any amazing things with it? Because it seems like they're raising the price just to have the status quo being like propagated. I don't really understand why rent control is suddenly going to cause pure disarray, since it seems like it's already in disarray with the raising
You
prices.
don't want to make it worse, right?
Well, and to add an example of this, just to bolster what Katarina was saying very quickly, there are places like, for example, the place I live that will install an extremely intrusive and obnoxious security system that doesn't actually solve any problem, and that counts as like an expense and an upgrade that they can increase the value of the property, even though none of the residents asked for it and nobody is actually benefiting from it. So there are things like that happen.
Okay, let's go to CounterPoints, and then Synth, Xenon, Amy.
Okay, so I think we're sidestepping a little bit the supply and demand thing. I know that the focus of the conversation is rent control, but at the same time, like what we're really talking about is market forces. Some offense intended. Every single place that you guys have mentioned so far has been like super cities on the West Coast or New York. Like that's literally the most expensive and most desirable places to live, despite some of those areas being absolute shitholes. And it's because you pick the most popular places in the world to live. Nobody has like an unfettered right to real estate just because they fucking feel like it. San Francisco is not like, you know, like I get it. It's beautiful. It's by the bay. It has like mist and the fucking bridge and like all that kind of shit. But
Real
there's
quick,
also
though, before you go off on that, like you do realize that like
Mm.
most people live in big cities, right? Like
sure.
by definition,
And
that's
it-
how they become a big city. Like this is kind of silly.
Sure.
The idea that like
you
people
guys
just
are on fucking super cities, like fucking next level bullshit that has intangible fucking measure, like intangible things that don't even fucking make sense. No, like I've been in these places. They are not conditions that anybody would really want to live in unless there was the appeal of being in this like named city.
what? Are you,
What?
Like, I don't know.
Don't you
This
think
is
that people
like
move to cities for jobs, though? Like, do you really think that the vast
Yes.
majority of people transplanted into cities are there just because they want to live there, or because they're
this
moving there
sounds
for a
like
job?
Do you think with the do you think with like the post COVID shift in economics, where a lot of like high end, high intelligence jobs are now going remote, don't you think that it's entirely possible that you have an increased opportunity to move if you have anything above actual like menial restaurant server, you know, retail restaurant work? Like retail restaurant, there's some level of like physical necessity because you have to be in the store in order to work. But with a higher level shit, do you have to be in New York in order to be an IT programmer? Do you have to be in New York in order to be an artist? Do you have to be in New York in order? Like, I could go down the fucking list, but besides networking, there's really not much that these places are offering you that other cities aren't.
Wait, have you ever lived in a big city, or is this just like country
I
boy
sure
don't like big city?
have.
Because it sounds a whole lot like
I've
country
lived.
boy don't like.
I've
What
lived
brought you to the
everywhere.
city? What brought you
It's
to
just
the
like I
city?
don't know, the idea that like living in a big city is
Young
just like
people,
it's
young
just
people,
like-
and getting wasted. That was pretty much it.
Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense.
let's-
Just the idea that like the only value that a city has is like, oh, you get to see the big city or something, and that like it's just a horrible place.
I don't
that
know
is
why
so
it's
ridiculous.
But that's
right
not,
now.
that's not
What
even
the
my
fuck?
fucking point. My point is that a lot of the amenities that you folks like. All right, you folks. I'll stop using you. A lot of
I
the
told you.
Okay, a lot of the amenities that some people seem to value are intangible, and a lot of the infrastructure that basically is like valued, like, oh, there's an art scene, and there's this, and there's that, and there's jobs, and there's this, and there's that. Like a lot of the bumfuck places that a lot of people snub their noses at, a lot of the bumfuck places now have these amenities and infrastructure as well. You mentioning that big cities, like, okay, see, this is so weird to me because you're now like, you're raising your nose at a point that you made a second ago. The vast majority of people live in cities. There's not 3 cities in the United States. It's not LA, San Francisco, and New York. There's Cincinnati, Ohio. There's Orlando. There's Jacksonville. There's Tallahassee. There's Houston. There's all these fucking places that everybody snubs their noses at.
I don't think anybody snubs their noses at that. Like, I feel like you're like getting like. I feel like you've. I genuinely feel like you've invented a person to get mad at right now. Like,
I've invented people who snub their noses at Houston, Texas. I snub my nose at Houston, Texas, and I
so
live
you
in
invented
Central
yourself.
Florida. Like,
Well,
what
this
the
is-
fuck?
He didn't invent himself. He
As
is
predicted.
himself,
As predicted.
Okay, so let's let some other people win.
All right.
And that's right. People are
Hey,
considering
we got a self-report.
living in rural areas because of this and because of that. All the things. All right, let's go to Sim.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Since you're muted.
We haven't really disagreed that rent control is a bad thing. We've sort of disagreed that rent control in the way that it is currently in policy is a bad thing, and we can't really control for all the variables. So like this is just true. I don't think we can control for all the variables yet. Because literally, unless we implement a nationwide rent control where everything is rent controlled, contractors will just build outside the rent control because it will be more profitable for them. It'll end up like in a decline in the long term. Like there are tons of problems with implementing rent control in the way that it is now. So actually controlling for all the variables is what we would have to figure out, and it would be a massive policy that would take so much work from the government.
Let's go.
Well, I mean, that's fine. Work is fine.
Yeah, but if the policy
Do you
is
trust the
idea
Republicans
manageable-
and the Dems to be able to do it?
No.
I don't
to
trust
be able
him
to implement like
scratch
public
their ass, but we
housing.
can't really say that. Like,
I don't trust
do
anybody to be able to do it.
I mean, if we're going
like-
to talk about who we trust to do anything, then well, I have bad news. We better start swallowing some black pills, because the reality is that
You
they're
can
not going
swallow
to do.
them all. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah, they're not
swallowing
going to do.
shit.
Sure.
boy.
They're
Canadian.
they're not gonna.
Sorry.
Finish your point, Demon Mama.
I don't know. This is so weird. This conversation's been so fucking weird. But yeah.
Welcome to
like,
another successful PrimeCayes closed panel. All right, go ahead.
Yeah,
There we go.
whatever. So my point is that like I think that the idea that like the government is gonna mess it up, it's like directly plays into the hands of the like current narrative of the free market, which they fuck it up too. As it turns out, these things are complicated, but there are just better ways of organizing. And I'm not saying that like a federal rent control wouldn't necessarily be okay. It's just that like I think it could do some good. The thing that I worry about is instating in the law on a federal level the necessitation of a private industry for housing. And I do think that's a huge problem. I don't think that we should reinforce that. And I think that even if it means the government has to spend more time and more effort on it, good. It'll solve a problem that's been plaguing our country for its entire existence.
Surely, yeah,
Ultimately,
but
I agree,
like we
but-
all seem. Oh, sorry, Sid.
Yeah.
That was to you.
Ultimately, I agree, but like, how are we going to be able to change this infrastructure like on a massive level? Like, what are we gonna? How are we gonna buy all the houses back? Like, how are we gonna acquire all the land back? How are we gonna like? Do we use what's it called, eminent domain, to just acquire shit? Like, what do we do? How do we implement these policies actually? Like, how do we
I mean,
get there
I'm not entirely
realistically at all?
opposed. I'm not entirely opposed to the idea of. I tend to not prefer like super authoritarian solutions, but I don't think that there's a. I think that given the scale of the homelessness problem in the United States and the housing problem in the United States, I think it might necessitate that. I would love it if there was other options, but the fact of reality is that right now, I don't know if there are.
Yeah,
right now.
Yeah, we
well,
could.
hold
like-
on. Let
like
me
the
finish.
only-
Let me finish.
okay.
Hold on a second before
Sure,
y'all freak out. The problem that we have right now is that there are people buying up these houses, and the people who are buying them up is massive corporations, and they are sitting on them because they know that right now people are getting evicted en masse, and they're going to just wait, and they can wait forever because they have billions of dollars in the bank. And yet people are literally freezing to death on the street while these apartments may be sitting completely empty. So I do think that I think that people really ought to think about the fact that like if we like inaction on this or insufficient action or action that feels like it's something but doesn't actually accomplish anything is going to necessitate a much worse situation later on by one mean or another, either by capitalists will continue seizing all of these properties until everyone is just completely screwed and you're paying Amazon bucks for your rent, or we recognize, okay, if we don't have a government action, even if it means seizing some buildings, even if it means saying, no, we are changing the law such that this type of setup is not allowed, such that this type of gaming the system is not allowed. I think that might be necessary, and I think it could be better than the alternative.
So,
Has this sort of been-
I'll let Simp respond, then we'll move to Xenon, Amy, Killer. Yeah, don't worry, we'll get back to all this. But Simp respond.
So I agree. The corporations are buying up and they're like fucking over the housing market completely. But the problem is if we enable rent control, then those multi-million-dollar companies can just starve the fuck out of small, tiny people who are renting out their second houses and just like fucking like trying to make mortgage on their second houses. Those corporations can literally just charge the minimum and fucking like not maintenance anything, still do the bare ass fucking minimum, and it would affect the people with like very small assets a lot more than the corporations.
Well, I mean, right now though, corporations already control most of the rental properties in America. It's like 5 giant housing companies that control most of American rental housing. The idea of like the small renter is unfortunately mostly a myth. There's not actually that many people. No, it's absolutely
That's about
true.
a third.
No, wait. You have to look at the
Private
actual
equity.
numbers. Like, I know that if you, I reckon.
Wait, we gotta
Jesus,
hurry.
like literally,
Hurry.
everyone is so triggered on this panel. I
Demon
didn't
Mama,
think that it was
hurry
gonna
up.
be
So
like-
we gotta let the plane. So hurry up.
Sure, let
I'm
other people
chilling,
talk because
alright.
otherwise
Let's
4
go.
people are gonna.
Let's go to free Xenon, then Amy, then Killer. Wow, everyone is just so skilled with the audio today. Got a bunch of streaming pros. Thank you. Try it again, Xenon. Still working out great. Sorry, we can't hear you, buddy. Yeah. So you're not muted in Discord. So.
Oh, they've got audio problems.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I think
we'll get right back to you, Xenon. So let us know, like, shout when it's working, so we know. And I'll come back to you after the next person. All right, buddy. So we'll go to Amy. Amy, just so you know, like, your audio seems a little hollow. It's like, I know your audio is a lot crisper usually. Are you using the same mic? Just want to be clear on that.
Yeah, that's. I think so.
Okay. Well, in any case,
It could just be Discord's algorithm.
yeah, we can still hear you. It's just that it sounds like you're using like a different mic than usual, but it's fine. Go ahead, Amy,
Okay,
please.
this mic is usually really sensitive. I don't know if it's the mic that from my webcam or not.
Yeah. Yeah,
can
might
hear
be
you.
that one.
Okay. So going back to, and this is why I brought up whether or not the study that was referenced was talking about San Francisco, because rent control at this juncture has been proven to fail due to the way that landlords tend to respond to rent control laws. Specifically in San Francisco, landlords used.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, good.
Amy, finish.
All right. Go, yeah.
Continue.
Do you want me to finish?
Yeah, please. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so landlords use the Ellis Act here in California to convert units that were held to a rent control standards for long-term either condos or turn them into a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb, to shy away from the limitations in monies that they could collect from their tenants. And that's the reason why over the long term there was a shortage in the supply, or there was a conversion in the supply of housing that made it seem like there was a bad thing. So we can't expect landlords to just accept a rent control standard. They're going to make less money. They're going to have limitations in how much money they can extract from their tenants. And that is always going to be a decision that they make as the owners of the homes, who are looking to maximize profits as much as possible. This is the reason why we rely so heavily on the private market for our housing, and landlords are looking to always increase their bottom line. There's always going to be a reason to look at the issues of the rent control standards instead of the behaviors and the activities of the landlords, who look to find any way possible to shy away from those same standards. And it seems like the best way to try to offer actual housing that does not require working over 50% of your income would be to look at the government using eminent domain, or exercising the powers that they have with acquiring vacant lands and property, specifically for the purposes of building public housing. Also, to address the issue of supply and demand, there's 17.5 million vacant units in this country. For every one homeless person, there are 31 empty units. So in terms of whether or not it is a true supply and demand issue, that's not necessarily true. We have to look at the way that the landlords and landholders are using the commodification of housing to further maximize their profits as much as humanly possible. So of course, a rent control standard looks like it could be problematic, but in all reality, it's just one of many policies that would have to be applied, along with increasing public housing stock, maybe a vacancy tax, other forms of taxation that would work to begin the process of decommodifying the housing market, removing some housing from the market altogether, looking to bring forward alternative solutions like community land trust, giving the ownership of the land and the properties back to the owners. We don't necessarily need the middleman. We do need to have more affordable options that could be bought by the actual community members. Those assets should stay within the community. They should not be subjected to predatory investment, which we know that private equity firms will do. This is what they did in 2008. They acquired over 300,000 single-family homes. They converted them into rental units. They started to offer a secondary market in securitizing loans, specifically for the purposes of investing in rental properties. And that market could be coming down at any moment now that we are about to see the moratorium on evictions lifted. 8 million people are expected to experience possible homelessness. Who do you think is going to benefit from a second market crash? The same private equity firms who will buy up even more residential rental stock, and it will make this existing problem that much worse. Right now, private equity owns about 1/3 of all rental housing stock. After this impending market crash that could very well be on its way, who knows how much more investment they will make to further monopolize on the ownership of land that will be used solely for the purposes of renting, keeping people in perpetual states of rentership. That is what we are seeing right now. Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry for the long-winded.
No, don't worry. We have DemonMama here. She does the long-winded stuff for us. All right, moving on. We go to Layman. Did you have a direct response to Amy? If not, then we'll get back to you. Just want to know.
Yeah, I'm just not really sure if you can say that like supply and demand isn't relevant to the conversation whatsoever. Now I'm not saying that I'm not a libertarian. I'm not like super. There are only free market solutions. We cannot do social housing. I'm in favor of social housing. My problem is that social housing isn't enough. I think it would be ideal to simultaneously, because these are not mutually exclusive ideas, also try to do things to incentivize some kind of competition between like homeownership homes, like have more, what's the word? The word is on the top of my head. What the fuck? New home construction businesses, incentivize them to build more homes. The more homes there are, the more opportunity there might be for them to compete with one another, and the more likely their houses might drop, their housing prices might drop as a consequence to keep up with each other's competition. I think you can do that simultaneously. Pardon?
Do you know how much it costs to build new housing?
A lot. So I'm in favor of things like tax incentives to attenuate how expensive that might be.
Right. So
I think that we can have a lot of
affordable housing options. You have to heavily subsidize the construction process in building new housing, right? Because here in Los Angeles, building a new housing unit is $500,000 to build one housing unit in Los Angeles, which is a rather saturated market. It's a very highly desirable area to live. Don't get me wrong, but how exactly are you going to stabilize costs of living when it's $500,000 just to build one unit in one of the more higher price markets?
I don't know. I'm trying to find solutions, and I was hoping we could work through some together. That's all.
Encouraging people to go to fucking Ohio.
Holy shit!
But why would you move to Ohio
if
you don't have a job, or if there's no if there's no employment opportunities? Like, I think that we have to look at.
Well, we have to look at all of these
general,
things in
but,
tandem. We have to look at all these things in tandem. All these things are true at the same time. That's the
hold
problem
up. DemonMama said there was nobody snubbing these small, medium cities. I admitted that I would snub some of these shitty cities, and then Prime did it like fucking 10 minutes later. We found 2 so far, and everybody else is biting their tongue.
I'm trying to say that
I'll tell you straight to your face. LOL, fuck most American cities.
We have the East Coast. We have the East Coast. We have the West Coast.
If you don't live in Quebec, I don't want to hear it. No,
Okay.
it's Quebec, okay? Quebec separatism. We need to live in the country of Quebec.
Katarana, enough. That is enough out of you.
Amy, please.
Ooh. Don't get me started.
Tabernacle.
Whatever.
Amy, did you have anything else? Just want to make sure.
I think that we are really failing to address that economic output determines one's location more than anything else. Some people do move to cities because they want to experience urbanization, but economic precarities, especially in this country, wealth inequality does not allow any one person, unless they are, incredibly privileged and a member of the advantaged classes in this country, they're not moving to a city to experience life in that particular city or experience the cultural identity of that city. They're moving to take a job. And unless there is some sort of incentive to move to Cleveland, Ohio, or the Midwest, we tend to see people stay where they are. And I also don't necessarily know if we should put the burden on lifelong residents in newly unaffordable city to force them to move out, because transplants who are moving into the city taking on these jobs because that particular city is experiencing a boom in a particular sector, that they should be forced to leave because they don't have the purchasing power or the material wealth to be able to compete with newly transplanted individuals who did move in for a job. I do think we have to look at the solutions for long-term residents, and that requires some preservation efforts that could be tied to our zoning ordinances, that could be government intervention, but it is a multifaceted issue that requires a lot of different solutions. But I don't think that it should be through a capitalist or neoliberal lens, and I definitely don't think that it should be reduced or minimized to only be addressed from within the private sector, because I think that housing within the privatized for-profit sector is the reason why we're in this mess to begin with.
Right.
Amy,
So,
may I please respond to that?
Xenon,
a little
please.
bit?
Xenon, and then we'll go to Killer as we wait
Okay.
patiently.
All
And then
right.
Layman, who's bursting at the seams. Xenon, please.
Oh, okay. I'm going to echo some of what Amy has said, although nowhere near as eloquently. Broadly speaking, supply isn't generally an issue, much like Amy brought up. What was the number you said? For every homeless person, there's 31?
31.
31 places to live sitting there empty, and half of which are investment properties just sitting there. And then the housing market, they're building more and more houses every year. It's not that we don't have enough housing, it's just that people don't have access to them. And that's pretty much fundamentally always going to be the problem because of the for-profit motive, much like was talked about by, I think, a few people here, that with the recessions and depressions that are going on, the housing bust, the millionaires, billionaires, and the corporations are buying up all the housing. And it's driving up prices, especially because they can wait until they can get however much they want for it. Because the profit problem is a large part of this problem. And of course, the income inequality problem and the wealth inequality problem is a prime driver of that as well. If people can't afford it, they can't have a place to live. And that's, housing should be a human right. But in this country, it's not. You don't have human rights unless you can pay for it. So one way we could look at dealing with this is dealing with the inequality issue. Increasing the minimum wage, because right now it's so low, people can't afford a place to live or food or anything else. And, being in poverty is expensive, and it gets more expensive as you go on. So raising the minimum wage, not just to a living wage, which people are talking about $15 minimum wage, but to a thriving wage, which in my policies, it's like $33 an hour.
I love it.
Not just
God.
that. It can't be just the minimum wage. The high minimum wage won't fix everything because of the inequality issue, broadly speaking. So we also need a maximum wage. If you do not have a maximum wage, your policies, you're not serious about getting rid of inequality, period, because it doesn't deal with that issue. So if you bring a low maximum wage and a high minimum wage, that will put all the prices for everything in between those two bars. Then, of course, you have to deal with the wealth issue as well. And some of the ways you can deal with that is, like was mentioned, increase the taxes on housing if it sits there vacant for a year. Again, land trusts, co-ops, public housing, all that sort of amazing stuff is another way to go as well.
Let's go to Killer, so waiting quite patiently. And then we'll go to Layman, and then Demon. Okay? And then Counter. Killer?
Everyone's so
why?
This is crazy.
What is happening today? I don't know.
Don't worry, guys. I'm a professional streamer. I do this stuff.
You didn't want to be left out, apparently, but it's okay.
No, I
don't.
I'm just.
I at least have an excuse, okay? I haven't been on a panel for like a year and I don't stream, so I at least have an excuse. Y'all,
Okay.
come on.
All
Y'all
right.
are supposed to be streamers.
No,
Oh, boy.
no,
You know
no.
better.
Everyone. I just didn't want everyone to feel bad, so I purposely set that up.
All right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Go
You
ahead,
wanted to
please.
be one of us.
Killer.
Yeah. For me personally, I don't think rent control is ever going to be the solution. Period. End of story. Because of so many economic burdens, problems, and everything that's going to come of it. But I do like a lot of the solutions that are starting to blossom from this conversation of things like maybe we set up an exponential housing increase. Like the more houses you own, exponentially the amount of taxes that you owe on each house or each unit
Value
increases.
tax, yeah.
Yeah. And doing stuff like that, like, because there's a lot of people, I actually know people that own 2, maybe sometimes 3 houses, and it's like, fuck you. People in this country can't get basic housing right now, and you guys, obviously you can't spend your life in 3 houses all together all at once. You're at very best like thirding it, where like 1/3 of the year you're going to each house. Most likely they're not even doing
Or you're
that.
moving back and forth really quickly. That's another option. You didn't really put that on the table. Come on, man.
Have you heard of quantum particles? What kind of nonsense is this?
Have you heard of the Flash? Honestly, but go ahead. Sorry, Killer. I apologize.
I was gonna say Dr. Manhattan, but
There
yeah.
we go.
I mean, I agree with the quantum mechanics portion of it. Obviously, there are certain probabilities that can happen where you split as a person, and then you are simultaneously living all 3 lives all at once. I didn't really think of that one. Thank you guys so much for coming up with that solution for these people. But when it comes to things like $500,000 for a housing unit from Amy, first off, I just want to give Amy credit. Everything that she said for stats has been completely true from my ears and everything, and it's just very refreshing when I get people that say absolutely true things, even though like I might disagree with the conclusion or like where they go with it. It's just very refreshing. For a lot of people who buy new houses, landlords or whatever, they don't necessarily make a profit for like 5 to 10 years until they pay off that debt from buying that new unit, and then they start making the profit off of basically what they would have been paying towards that debt is now going towards them. But at the same time, though, we do have to outright agree that this country is getting oversaturated with people owning all the fucking housing shit and annoying stuff. And also, what more annoys me is people owning more than 2 houses, 3, 4. I mean, we've got people like Bernie Sanders who complains about this stuff, and he owns multiple houses. And I do agree with Free Xenon that it's not just that a lot of this isn't that we don't have enough housing, it's that we just don't have access to it. And then finally, because I've been waiting for so long to address Connor, I agree with a lot that he said. Where I get my housing, where my living and everything is actually a lot of it now is coming from COVID, where I work mainly from home. I work out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and my rent is about $1,000 a month, which is like unheard of to a lot of people. And I actually love it out being out in the middle of nowhere. Everyone fucking smiles at you and says hi when you go to the coffee shop. When you go to the major city, everyone gives you the middle finger, and when you say hi to a girl because she's being awkward out in the middle of the area, she thinks that like I'm planning on like abducting her or something weird. And I'm like, no, calm the fuck down, major cities. Look, can we just go back to the countryside over here?
Oh.
You mean to tell me that you pay $1,000 to live in
No, you can say bumfuck. You can say bumfuck.
Okay.
No, it's cool.
Okay, we are 4.
Probably
4 stops so
probably-
I'm just
far.
saying $1,000 seems like a lot of money to live out in the
It's
middle.
literally a lot of money. I
probably-
paid $1,000 to live like 10 minutes from the middle of downtown of like the second largest city in a country. Like,
I'm going to consider
on.
that a
Well,
I'm
he
gonna consider
probably
that a
has
snobby
a
comment
lot
too.
more. He
I'm
probably
not gonna-
has a lot more
okay,
rooms than you
here.
people.
Hear me out. First off, I'm not gonna fucking tell everyone on the internet where the fuck I live.
I just
So,
assume Wyoming. Thank you.
Obviously, the context changes. And by the way, it changes also where you live in Wyoming, because you can live an hour away from major cities in Utah and Colorado in fucking Wyoming. And second off, I've got multiple bedrooms. I have a full-on kitchen, bedroom, or living room and everything else. And I've got over like 1,500 square feet, about 2,000, I think, square feet of space right now.
He's
I
got
think
so
it's
many
like-
rooms, he hasn't even jerked
That's what
off
I
in
was
every
saying.
single room yet.
I was
So
like,
fucking
Because
hard.
what I
living there
was
for
saying is that like
years.
he's paying
I've struggled.
$1,000, and the amount of room and the amount of like shit that he's getting for $1,000 is so much fucking more than living in an inner city. It just is. Like, so if you can afford to do it, then yeah.
And the most amazing part is everything's a fucking walk away. If I want to go to a coffee shop, if I want to go to the local like community college or university, or even to my work, it's like 10 minutes away walk. fucking wonderful.
You and these coffee shops and these women who don't recognize the danger that you pose. All right, let's move on to layman, demon, and counter.
There's just so much said. I can't even remember what I was going to respond to at this point.
You were going to respond to Amy before Amy said something amazing,
yeah, but Amy
and
said
you were going to
so
pretend
many
that
things.
Amy
said so many things.
You were going to pretend that she said something wrong. But go ahead.
She did say something wrong. Not that it was all bad. I don't like when we look at things like housing that require like so many individual moving parts, so many individual policy solutions. We look at so many problems with housing, and I think that the problems oftentimes feel so overwhelming that the solutions become a little too idealistic.
The problem is capitalism, full stop.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's what I mean. Too idealistic. Destroying capitalism isn't a solution to the housing problem. It's idealistic conjecture. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it would be nice if we are there any specific policies that are like empirically demonstrable that could help? That's what I'm interested in. So like,
yes, it's expropriating housing stock and converting them into public housing.
Well, I actually agree with what Layman's saying, and I'm going to support him really fast.
What are the chances of that happening?
I didn't even get to say.
Okay, I'm
I
sorry.
wasn't finished yet.
I mean, how frequently do we use eminent domain for like malls and shit like that?
Let Layman finish.
Okay,
please.
so yeah. So I'm not opposed to social housing. The problem is that like social housing by itself isn't enough. That's all I'm saying. So like I'm not opposed to social housing, like I said already. It's just that like social housing only gets you so far. So in Vancouver, for example, in Canada, they have a lot of social housing. And I think I'm not opposed to that. But the problem is that like Vancouver at the same time is the most expensive place to live in the entire country, regardless of this. So it seems like, again, I know that supply and demand, we all had a problem with that earlier. I think that on top of that, though, like, Amy, you said that there's no like neoliberal or whatever solution to anything, but then I heard you list the solution that I see mostly neoliberal support, which is to some extent, deregulate certain zoning laws in certain areas. So developers can have more can have more opportunities to develop more housing, like I said before, to incentivize competition amongst one another so they can potentially have lower prices amongst themselves.
My zoning policy proposal has nothing to do with making zoning changes for upzoning that would allow for more high density housing. I would actually like to have a new amended approach to looking at preservation overlay zones that would work in tandem with the creation of community land trusts at a neighborhood scale that would allow for intermediary protection against predatory investment while a CLT is forming, because sometimes it can take a little while to form a CLT and allow for the community assets to be bought and sold into an entity that would then act as a third-party land trust. And that as a steward of the land, that can take a little bit of time. And in the interim, knowing that it would still take a long time to make any amendment to the zone and work through city council. That's more so what I have in mind for making changes to a zoning ordinance. It would be to preserve and protect vulnerable communities from predatory investment that leads directly to gentrification.
Okay, so what's the? Sorry, there was just a lot there. There's a lot of terminology. That's okay. A lot of terminology I'm not familiar with. What's the name of the exact policy? Like, is there I know might be hard to oversimplify these things. I just like to see if there's like studies on it or something that I can look at. That's all. And see like the success rate of policies like that.
So community land trusts, they are not as common in the United States. There's 225 community land trusts, and basically they were introduced during the civil rights movement to protect predominantly African American communities. What I would like to see happen is more preservation zoned areas that tend to only be offered to historic neighborhoods that go through the National Register of Historic Places. And that does allow for the identity, the historical significance of a community to be preserved and taken off the market, I think we could extend something similar to the preservation of low-income communities that have been historically impacted from redlining. The history of exclusionary zoning would definitely apply, but non-white, low-income neighborhoods that were subjected to de facto segregation, redlining, historically segregated neighborhoods, or
So I agree with this.
banking discrimination, they all need to right now have some sort of protective overlay or barrier between predatory investors who are looking to gentrify areas, as they are commonly found in a city proper, and as more individuals are we have a market for individuals who want to move into the city, who have the purchasing power. Those neighborhoods are most vulnerable and most subjected to gentrification.
Right.
And have some sort of government intervention to protect them.
Okay. So you mentioned, the name of this policy specifically is called Community Land Trust. Okay. So I'm looking up some shit really quick. It seems like we have some things like this actually in my home province in Canada, and it seems like they actually are helpful. So I can concede that for sure, the community land trust stuff. And then you mentioned the history of like discriminatory housing laws and stuff, or not housing, zoning laws. Again, this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. This is something a lot of neoliberals want to get rid of. There's a lot of these that exist in Toronto, for example, and like a lot of them want to get rid of that. A lot of them want to get rid of those zoning laws. They want to deregulate that.
To what
so
end?
There can be
though?
more. Well, to the end is so people can. So there's more opportunity to build more housing for, again, like Amy said earlier, these high density areas.
That's not necessarily what I want to see happen. I think.
Well, I understand that. What I'm saying is that you are united with the globe heads. Let us call them, and that you want to get rid of that zoning law.
I don't. No. That's not what I said. I don't want to get rid of zoning laws, especially because zoning laws do help to protect lower income community members who have been subjected to environments of racism and other forms of.
I'm not saying all of the zoning laws. I'm not saying all of them, or the ones that help. I'm saying that the ones that the zoning laws in and of themselves that are discriminatory. I hear neolibs talk about this all the time. That's all I'm saying. I'm not anti all zoning, get rid of all the zoning laws. I just want to make that clear.
So single family housing has been, or R1 zone single family housing zoned areas have been synonymous with exclusionary zoning, and cities like Minneapolis, they have worked to abolish R1 zones and move to a multi-use zone that would allow for, or mixed use zone to diversify the suburbs. And that is more so what I am aligned with, not necessarily to allow for the complete unfettered building of housing in a particular area. But you tend to see a lot of housing advocates want to abolish R1 zones in particular because of the historical reference to exclusionary zoning, racist banking practices, redlining, and white flight that go into the creation of the suburbs and trying to, right the wrongs of our built environment that were built along racial lines is the reason why some housing advocates who are the most progressive or left-leaning, they do so for this very specific purpose. And I'd like to do an overlay to protect and preserve traditionally low-income neighborhoods of color so that they do not have to experience the predatory investment that is occurring in the gentrification process in most major cities.
So I want to let in the other two who've been waiting patiently, which is not like them. Demon and Counter. Demon, please.
I'm gonna make you pay for that one. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore, honestly. I was gonna say
we can move on to
the
should we have landlords in the first place? You want to move to that? It's fine.
Well, I mean, it's okay. So there's a couple of things going on here. One is like there's been sort of this weird declaration or like an attempt to like set up a straw man. It's like, oh, well, everybody's just giving very idealistic solutions. But I feel like the solutions offered by the people critical of rent control from the left have actually been quite like down to earth and reasonable. I
Like
do
a
think that there is.
$33 an hour minimum wage.
Wait, sorry. Is that the like? Did you hook on one thing that was said?
No, I'm saying that is an example of something
I
that I
mean,
was
so
referring to.
you
I
so you
didn't
basically
disagree.
so
I
hold
didn't
on.
disagree.
So
with
you
all
interrupted
of
my
these
statement.
things.
So Layman,
That's all I'm
Layman,
saying.
you interrupted my statement to pick on a literal single line said at one point by Free Xenon. And once again, like this is
As
why
you
this
did
is
for
why
me,
I'm
yeah. That's why I'm butting in, so I can just clarify
is this
what I meant, because there's a huge
Please.
mischaracterization going
Okay,
on. That's all.
let's
okay.
Dear Mama,
Yeah,
please.
mischaracterization. Okay. So look, the just move 5 head is a rock bottomly stupid take. Moving is incredibly expensive and also psychologically traumatic for many people. It is a thing that people are incredibly reluctant to do, especially if they're moving from a place they've lived for a very long time. That doesn't mean that moving is always bad, but the idea that people can just move to some random rural area at any given moment is completely ridiculous on its face. And also the idea that like I will agree that most rural areas have cheaper rent, but it's almost hilarious to think that like as somebody who has spent my entire life until very recently living in rural areas, most rural areas are not 10 minutes away from anything. You need to have a car, which increases the cost of living. I don't know anybody. When I lived in a rural area, nobody, rich or poor, you would get rid of your house before you got rid of your car, because at least your car can give you heat in the winter and you can drive to go get food, because unless you own a farm, you live on a forested piece of land 20 minutes away from the nearest restaurant. And that's even before we start talking about the husking out of American rural cities, which now mostly consist of a McDonald's, a Walmart, and a Petco. And that is what it remains. Small businesses are basically gone, especially after the pandemic, where they received very little aid. So yeah, there's just like a lot of really. It's funny, like there's all these accusations of like pie in the sky. I don't see it. I've found this to be a hard topic to track as far as what we're actually talking about. But if we're going to be wrapping it up anyway on this topic, I will say that I think that there should be much more criticism pointed at the institution of landlords and the institution of private housing in general. I think that this is something that will require decisive and aggressive action on behalf of the people of America, and if that ends up being on behalf of the state taking an action, or everybody else figuring out another solution, it's going to happen. We are about to hit eviction moratoriums are about to expire. We are going to have an unprecedented jump in homelessness, and there already has been. Like, I can physically see the increase in homelessness in the area that I live in, and it's very sad to see, and it's very concerning. And I think that many Americans are rightfully afraid of this sort of thing. And just so you know, people don't tend to stay very happy when they're homeless. And the more homeless people there are, the more crowded they are, the less resources that are going to be available in a country that already doesn't give them anything. So that is, I don't know if people like do the history thing here. I don't know if people do the literature thing, but I recommend reading some books about the 1920s, the Great Depression, and the follow up. Because damn, listen, things get real rowdy when people don't have a home to go back to at night. I personally prefer the less rowdy solutions. I would love it if we could have a responsible country that would sit down and go, hey, we need to do something about housing, because otherwise a significant percentage of our population is literally not going to have a house. But guess what? If they don't do that, if we don't start thinking like big and not just small, like, oh, maybe we'll increase the vouchers by 25 cents a week for the next 10 weeks. And then, these sort of like idiotic, almost like offensively bad and mild solutions are going to result in a ton of homeless people getting very, very angry. And and those people are not going to be nicely organized. It is going to be desperate people who are filling every street corner of every major city in America. And that is not a fun thing. And also, it's a horrible thing to do to somebody else. And you could be one of those people. So, yeah, well, maybe not in Canada, because there's some level of like basic human decency preserved in that country. But here in America, oh yeah, we're pedal to the metal right now. But yeah. That's basically the summary of everything I'm going to say. I think that poo-pooing bold solutions just because there isn't like a broad scale analysis that's been done on it, because these things have literally never been done, is a way to trap yourself is a way to trap yourself on the path to disaster, especially when the stakes are this high. When we're talking about one of the basic, that's like being like, well, we shouldn't radically change our water system, even though in 3 days, 10% of the population is going to be out of water. Like, no, you're going to need to do some stuff, and you might need to try some things that are substantiated. Now, I'm not saying just shoot in the dark, but that might not have been done on a large scale before, because otherwise the alternative is having 10% of your population dead on the street or breaking into everyone else's houses to steal their water. And I don't think either of those are really ideal.
So we'll go
Hold on.
to...
Can I give one quick 10 seconds?
Sure, 10 seconds.
Okay. I'm here for the important takes, and DemonMama specified that the towns that she came from in the rural areas had a fucking Petco, and I'm just impressed. What rich ass place did you come from that had a fucking Petco in the middle of rural areas? Holy shit!
You give your dogs mud?
This is unironically the most weird champ conversation I've ever had. Every single attempt at comedy on this entire panel so far has been, holy moly, has it been just so awkward. No offense, but
we're nerds on the internet arguing about politics. You've been talking for 10 minutes. It's my turn to talk for 10 minutes.
Give it to counterpoints. I get it. You hate my fucking comedy and my jokes. I get it.
Killer, I love you, and I am a fucking boomer on Twitter posting boomer memes at all times. Bad humor that doesn't fucking land is my favorite kind of humor.
In my rural area, every time I talk to a woman, she runs away screaming. I don't know what's going on.
It was funny as shit to me.
Okay.
Oh god, it's
Wow.
It was
so
funny as shit to me. Move on. Let's go to Connor.
All right, Connor. You were about to tell us how much you love landlords, how much they're your heroes. You look up to them.
Fucking Bastiat's my favorite person in the world.
Is he a landlord? Oh, for fuck's sake! God damn
Dude,
it.
same.
He's a landlord and an oil lawyer. So
literally about god, he's just everything I want in a man. Landlord and oil lawyer.
I want to make a couple of quick points. Yeah, okay. We'll figure that out on Twitter later, okay? So I actually want to propose solutions that I feel like are more centrist, reasonable. I know I've been poo-pooing on everybody's pie in the sky solution, so let's get to it. So I think Killer said landlords don't make a profit for the first 5 or 10 years. I would like to point out that any property owner that actually owns their property is still making the right choice by building equity in their own property. So what'll happen is once any property is paid off, like a mortgage, you've now built up that value within the property that you now currently own. So even if you're paying property taxes, you now have built up that equity. So that's why a lot of landlords look at their investments as paying for themselves. So no, I will not be defending landlords in this rant. I just wanted to point that out for those of you who might be smart enough to become landlords. 30 units of housing per one homeless person. This was brought up in response to supply and demand. I would like to point out that homeless people from a market-based standpoint don't have a demand. Now, they might have an actual material demand. Ooh, I see it. They might have an actual material demand, but they don't have an economic capitalistic demand. I'm sure that's partially your point. All right, move to the rural areas 5 head. That was not my fucking point. I was saying move to cities that all of you are fucking poo-pooing. Cincinnati, Ohio, Houston, Texas. But somebody name a shitty city that you fucking hate. I don't know, somewhere in Wisconsin.
Whichever one you live in. That one.
Okay. Yeah. So Central Florida. Okay. So come on down. We have lots of putt-putt golf, and you can drive 90 minutes to Disney. So if I'm going to poo-poo everybody else's solutions, maybe I should propose some actual solutions that I think would be more realistically adopted by the right wing. And by the way, you share 50% of this fucking country with the right wing. So you can't just create solutions in your fucking head that are going to solve everything and then never actually implement them unless you overthrow democracy. So, so here's number one. Number one would be permanent housing for the long-term homeless. Basically places that you could concentrate people who do not have the ability to defend for themselves. And on top of that, you can basically plan out the housing. That way you can concentrate services, on-site nursing, on-site psychological help, on-site substance abuse counseling. That way, instead of me walking down to my downtown area where I have to get asked if I have $5 cash every single time that I'm fucking stepping over a homeless person, instead they have a place to go, a place to sleep, a place to get food, and a place to get essential services that would basically take them off of the street. So that's number one, is permanent housing for the long-term homeless. Second one
just
would
write
be
carceral housing or prison or concentration
permanent.
camp.
Permanent.
Okay.
Okay, so community housing. I'm not done yet.
Go ahead.
No, I listened to everybody else.
Go
I was
ahead.
very
Go
patient.
ahead.
All right, second one is community housing. This would be a tier up. Basically, community housing in which people who were like temporarily thrown out of their houses, all that kind of stuff, they could go there and have subsidized or free rent temporarily. Maybe it's not the best amenities. Maybe your internet isn't fucking fiber, but at the same time, it's a place that you can afford in order to get your feet underneath you. That way you can basically move on and leverage yourself financially into a better position. One of the objections that everybody was bringing up was the fact that people can't leverage themselves economically into better positions if there was some form of temporary community housing that gave people the financial ability, the temporary homeless to build up financial whatever into their fucking pocket so they can make moves. That would be awesome. Not finally, but zoned housing that actually supports the working and middle class of a city to maintain its health and vitality. One of the things that's happening that you guys brought up was the fact that all these properties were being built and then turned into temporary rentals for fucking rich people to come in. And what was happening was that the workers, the people who actually live in that city, had to commute increasing distances in order to get into the city to do their fucking jobs. I think it's in a city's best interest to keep its working and middle class happy. So you should zone condos inside the city that would actually support that working and middle class population that's required for the house. On top of that, you could make them condominiums so the people who live there can own the property and build positive equity for their own benefit. Not only that, but you could also do really cool design shit that a bunch of engineers and public policy nerds would love to fucking do. Like build a whole bunch of housing units on the 2nd through fucking 20th stories and then build like gym, community amenities, and fucking grocery stores at the bottom level so you never have to leave your house, which I know a bunch of you fucking coomer fucking, anti-environment agoraphobes would fucking love. So I'm proposing solutions that you fucking want. Finally, on an individualistic level, last point, I promise. On an individualistic level, I was not suggesting rural areas just move 5 head. Again, I was just suggesting moving to cities that might not be as popular, might not be as sexy. They might not have sexy ass people like Prime, if he's an ATL or whatever. They might not have sexy ass people like me in Central Florida, but they do have sexy ass people like Killer Sieg that you can meet at your local coffee shop. So there, yield.
Yeah. So the whole idea of like, if we just go ahead and fix zoning laws that might actually do something is a bit strange, just because I'm used to a lot of times people go ahead and just buying up property inside of like condos and using those as Airbnbs. Like you still end up having that same problem no matter what type of property type you have. A lot of people end up just turning it into Airbnbs. I think
New York, I believe New York has addressed this, although it obviously has a regulatory problem where they try to create the solution, but they don't have the ability to actually regulate it, where they basically say, if you don't actually own the property, you're not allowed to stay there. Of course, there's like subleasing and all that kind of stuff, but then there's also people who get caught subleasing and then they actually go to jail for prolonged periods of time. So no, like just because somebody's going to break a law doesn't mean that you shouldn't create a law. Just because, somebody's going to abuse the design doesn't mean that you shouldn't create a good design. So,
okay, so that was
this can all be done.
your full solution is to also go ahead and implement like the New York like model where you can't do Airbnbs legally.
I fucking hate New York, but yes. Like, so for instance, like if the whole solution of a certain zoning area was to provide adequate housing for the actual working and middle class of that city, that way the working and middle class could be within walking, biking, or basically like electric scooter driving distance of their jobs, then yeah, absolutely. Because on top of that, we're talking about a negative externality that nobody's really brought up in this conversation, which is climate change. We have to completely think about the way that we're doing transportation and sending people out 90 minutes to 2 hours every single day to drive by themselves in a car to their job is not environmentally sustainable. So basically, if you want to change the game, if you actually want to like use climate change as an externality that we have to include into this calculus, then cities, American cities, have to take the commutes of their working class and middle class population very seriously.
Isn't there a way to get like a mixture of these models? Because like for example, yes, that's a huge problem in a city like Toronto where like nothing is affordable, rent is crazy, etc. But like in Montreal, like most like one bedroom units are about $1,000, and like you can live 10 minutes away from the city center, but you also can have opportunities to have single family homes that are slightly outside of the city that are like half an hour away. And then there's also a lot of Airbnbs, which really help to supplement incomes for some people, like especially when you do like the shared unit type of thing, because that's what I did for the first 2 years of university. I was just like, yeah, somebody used the bedroom over there, and that helps me pay for my rent. So you can have a mixture of all of these, and maybe like there's certain regulations that can be done that doesn't necessarily say, okay, tourists have to go through the hoteling industry, yet people can still afford to live there, and gentrification isn't absolutely ravaging the entire city.
Yeah, policy solutions have to be fixed enough that they solve the problems that they're like purported to solve, and they have to be flexible enough that they can withstand like checks. So, for instance, somebody was bringing up like a minimum and a maximum wage. That's like for me, like just basically like trying to like extrapolate that out like consciously or whatever. That's way too stringent. Like $33 an hour, you're creating like a lot of like negative externalities that can't be controlled by the market. But you know what would solve your problem is bringing back unions in an aggressive way. That way, you don't have to have necessarily a minimum wage, but you do have a collective of employees that negotiate their salaries, benefits, and the working conditions that they're willing to tolerate in order to get a decent wage. So, I mean, everybody brings up like the Norwegian states or whatever. I'm pretty sure Denmark doesn't even have a minimum wage, but they do have a very strong union culture.
Amy, Counter brought up a whole bunch of points as to like solutions. What did you think of them?
I think that if you're familiar with the Austria model and the way that public housing is very similar to what was introduced in this working class zoned area in the inner city, that would be based on upzoning and creating more high density housing, that is very similar to very successful public housing models that we have seen that's based on income, that would ultimately serve the greater good and could potentially operate as CLTs that would allow existing dwellers to accumulate equity on their spaces. And there is a way to do that in a more equitable fashion. I still do not get behind the notion that any new housing solution should be within or should be based within the construction in the private market, because the shareholders that are helping to invest in any new projects that go through a real estate investment trust that is then bundled as a mortgage security and traded on Wall Street is always going to have those financial interests first and foremost at the forefront of the conversation. That makes it really difficult to feel like we can alleviate the burden of high rental or even mortgage prices, because we are constantly looking to ensure that the shareholders are happy, that the stakeholders are happy, and we can't necessarily do that in any real capacity when we're talking about building new housing in an already saturated, already populous area. So again, this is where I think government intervention has to be included in this calculus. We have to look at the ways that we build in a subsidized program that allows for lower costs of construction that will ultimately go back into city-owned lands. And from there, we can talk about the implementation of CLTs that could ultimately do the same thing as condominiums. And that would be, I think, an optimal solution. I just don't agree that we should be including the privatized for-profit capitalist class when it comes to finding any real long-term sustainable housing solutions. And you are correct that we have to include transportation and other variants of our built environment to find the best solutions possible to control for not only the affordability epidemic, but also the bigger impending epidemic that would be global climate change.
But just to address this head on. So for instance, like, I don't know. So I'm a centrist. I like to think that I'm a pragmatist, all that kind of stuff. I think that if you were to try to create like, basically like, if you were to sell to a city, hey, Los Angeles, you have people who are, you talk about environmentalism, you talk about being one of the most progressive and interesting and diverse cities on the entire planet, but you have people who live in your fucking city who are commuting 3 hours, they're causing smog, they're causing traffic, they're causing all this kind of bullshit. We need to have housing specifically for your working and middle class in order to benefit the businesses that are in there. Then you're going to have a lot easier of a pitch to government officials, zoning officials, all that kind of stuff, than saying like, hey, fuck you capitalist pigs who are profiting off of my fucking labor. Give me, housing so I can have my human dignity now. And hopefully I'll build up my fucking power base to chop your fucking guillotine fucking ass landlord head later on.
With this, though. There's a problem with this. That
There's
these exact. Well, yeah, of course there is. I mean,
Mhm.
this solution has been suggested for a very long time, and it doesn't happen. And the reason it's not happening is not because of like a lack of will or a lack of awareness of the problem. Like, people know that the working class keeps getting pushed further and further out, which increases their expenses, which increase the amount of that reduces their quality of life because they spend all their lives in commuting, and nobody cares. And the reason why is not because people aren't making good arguments. The arguments are being there. It's because the people who have the property don't give a shit. It's because they want to keep making money, and this is how they keep making money. The rest of the world be damned. What's good for the country be damned. And this is where I tend to agree most strongly when Amy says that like government intervention is something that has to be seriously considered, because there, like, how do you check that sort of profit motive when there is massive, like especially massive housing corporations that are not only willing to play politics, which we could talk about that, but even without getting into how much they influence politics, they just simply won't do the thing you want them to do because they want to make money. They will fight against it tooth and nail, and they can sit back on it because they're not out of a house. It's their tenants or their potential tenants that are out of house. And if you have a government that refuses to do anything about that, it's a giant game of chicken. And it puts us in a very awkward position. This is why I said that I think it's very important that we take these sorts of issues and more aggressive solutions than just changing zoning laws and hoping that the market will follow when we change those things, but instead taking proactive measures, because the alternative is that you're going to have people living on the street who are desperate and who cannot get back out of it. We all know on this panel the statistics in America on how hard it is to get out of poverty once you're in poverty. We want to prevent that from happening.
What proactive measure? Okay, so what proactive measure do you think is like? So you're basically saying that this like centrism doesn't go far enough. This policy
I don't think it does.
Okay. So let me ask this question. What pragmatic policy do you think that lefties such as Amy, who's clearly very well read on the subject, what policy do you think that either you or she or anybody here has suggested that has a snowball's chance in hell of being fucking passed in the next decade?
Oh, of the chance of being passed in the next decade? I don't think there's much at all. Unfortunately.
So how is that not less pragmatic than what I'm proposing?
Hold on a second, because wait, it's the same level of it's like, as far as the likelihood of getting passed.
Snowman's chance in hell. All right.
I don't think you do. I think you underestimate how I mean, have we all just been asleep for the last 10 years of politics, where the Republicans literally just play complete obstructionist? They don't want to budge. They don't care about housing rights. They literally don't care. They believe that if you don't pay for it, you deserve to be homeless. This is a huge ideological split in America, and it's a massive problem because they can play hardball and they can just obstruct the entire way, as they've been doing for a decade, as they did through the entire pandemic. They just sit by, and the people who don't have die, and the people who do have wait and then become more rich. And that is a very, very, very difficult situation for us to find ourselves in. So I don't think it's if your only solution is a purely electoral process, I think that is a scary world to subscribe to, because if you think that's the case, well, then there isn't a snowball's chance in hell. There is no chance you're going to win over the Republicans or even the conservative Democrats with anything other than you deserve to be homeless, stop doing drugs,
okay.
Fivehead.
Okay, so this is interesting to me, because basically what I hear is I'm a libertarian, but And then you literally just said that you don't believe that electoralism is going to proffer a solution in the next decade, and it's unrealistic of me to consider that it will. So what is the mechanism that you're going to implement any of these ideas through?
Oh, I think there's a couple of ways that this could be done. One way is that you could have major, like, you could have state building projects, quite frankly, where you say, okay, if there's a parking lot that's not being used in the middle of a town, we are going to eminent domain this, and we are going to build this into an apartment unit that will be given to the working people that you've mentioned so many times in this panel. That's one possible solution. Another possible solution.
But are you talking about like capturing a municipal office electorally, or are you talking about like literally people on the street just being like, nah, this is ours now, like Chaz?
Oh, well, I mean, that might happen. Like, I mean, you might have, I mean, Chaz that's a really stupid, like, parallel to draw. Like, that's not what happened at Chaz at all. But like, aggressive.
Well, they did seize public property.
Oh boy,
no,
let's focus. Let's focus.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Like, CounterPoint still buys into like the city of Portland is burning to the ground narrative. Sorry, I forgot. I'm literally on fire being in the town of Seattle. So yeah, no, I think that I think that there are more executive options that you can do on a state and or a federal level to get involved on these. You know, not my preferred method. I wish there were easier ways. I wish that we had a system that was more even. But I think there are other solutions as well. I think that you're going to see people like pool together and basically buy and convert and build their own communal housing projects. It might be a very laborious and uncomfortable process for those people, but that's something that I think we're going to see a lot of, and I think that we should facilitate that instead of basically playing obstruction. If the government can help with that, that will greatly grease the wheels. I really hope that we don't end up in a situation where it's all like sort of insurgent like squatting, where people basically squat a building and refuse to leave, and then the government says, okay, well, you people live here, so we're either going to kill you or we're going to take it away from the people who own it but aren't using it. I mean, that's the case where we are in a lot of places. We have people, I mean, in the city, I mean, fuck, even in the city that I live in, if you go into the industrial district, there are just tents clustering around empty buildings that you'll get beaten by the cops if you go in the empty building to get shelter, and but the building is empty. So yeah, you're going to see that. Like, if that's what you want to avoid, then we need more aggressive government solutions. And if people aren't going to vote on those aggressive government solutions, then they're making their own bed. Because what I've been pointing out for this entire thing is that housing is not a want. It's not a luxury. It's a need. Every person needs a house. And like, just like how a person, like, I don't know, there's a like a goofy ass saying out there that every person is 3 days of water and 1 week of food away from being, like, I can't remember what they say, something like wild, like revolutionary or a Mad Max, whatever. But that is true. If people get to that point, then it will not be nice solutions. So I am trying to say we should have nice solutions, but the reality is that we have an enormous amount of people in our government that are deliberately playing obstruction. So what that means is that Democrats, because let's be real, this is a partisan issue, Democrats need to get more aggressive, or else the answer is going to be that people figure it out for themselves, and that might mean kicking down doors or building weird shanty towns that have no building standards because they desperately need somewhere to live, and then you know, I hope that's not the case, but that's what's going to happen, because these are needs that aren't being met. These aren't just luxuries. And again, I don't know, like, we can point to a whole bunch of the attitudes that Americans have towards homeless people to you know, illustrate. Even on this panel, there's been some sentiment towards homeless people that is positively dehumanizing. And let's just say, I mean, damn. I just really hope that people are taking it serious, that these are human beings that don't have homes, that have actual needs, that they will find a way to solve, or they will die trying.
Right. I think it's going to come down to grassroots organizing and what will become a national network of local level organizing that will ultimately be the only way to take this matter seriously. Because right now, as you pointed out, the Democrats are taking money from the private equity firms. The local city council members, they are right now at the behest of private developers. Government officials at every single level are facilitating this dominating market that is worth In the more liberal estimates, $33.6 trillion. That is the residential real estate market, equating to $33.6 trillion that is facilitated by the government because it is one of the most lucrative money-making profit motive machines that we have. So because of the commodification of housing and how much money there is to be made in the real estate economy, a lot of politicians are on board with maintaining this model, even at the expense of the most vulnerable people. Even if it means that we are going to see an uptick in homelessness, it is going to take it's going to be a concerted effort of education and capacity building to understand what we as regular ass people who just want to have decent standards of living, what we're up against. And that does come with a lot of organizing and a lot of work on the ground. That ground game, I think, is starting to see some real changes. More people are becoming aware of what they can do as members of the community, and community empowerment is starting to I think transition to more members of tenant unions, more people joining DSA, and I think through that avenue, we will see more people demand more from local politicians, and that's where it's going to really start, if it starts at all.
Thank you so much. All right, I think that's actually a really good point to move on to our next topic. Thank you for that. Thank you for the passion that was brought here and the knowledge. Amy, thank you so much for your perspective on this. This is very useful. You raised the level of discourse we had on this topic, right? Otherwise, we just...
I only did agree to this topic, though, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I was going to dip.
Sure. Thank you for coming through, Amy.
Before you go, Amy, I just want to say the CLT thing. It's. Oh shit.
Right. No,
oh, I'm not muted. I thought I was muted. Sorry.
Bye.
It turns out I'm not muted.
All
Amy,
right.
before you go, just want to say the CLT thing, I'm reading more into it. It looks pretty cool. I want to look into this more. I think this could sell. I think this is something that I could sell to like a broad range of people from a broad range of political ideologies and different like spectrums and stuff like that, and sort of get a lot of people behind this. So thank you for turning me on to that idea. It's like by and large the most useful thing I got out of the conversation. So thank you.
Awesome. All right.
Amy,
so
we'd love to have you again. We did it only once before, but we had a talk on housing, like a one-on-one talk. It was I thoroughly enjoyed that last time. We'd love to do that again sometime in the future.
Sounds good. Just let me know.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks so much for being here.
Bye.
All right. Okay. Moving on. All right. So again, thank you all for being so kind. Before we go anywhere else, this is something that's just been on my mind, and like it has to be said. All right, DemonMama, are you doing like a Poison Ivy cosplay? Is that I'm actually is that what you're going for?
Not intentionally, but I'm not opposed to that.
All right. Well, you look good in it. You look good in it.
I just happened upon a very nice green dress, and then it coincided. My finding of this green dress coincided with me getting my hair color changed, and yeah, you know what? I'm okay with that. I love Poison Ivy.
All right, yeah, good character, good choice in character, one or the other. All right, but thanks all. We'll move forward. Topic 2. John Cena recently apologized to his Chinese audience for the crime of calling Taiwan a country. This is yet another example of Westerners bending to the will of the Chinese Communist Party. Part of the problems of globalization was that authoritarian regimes would liberalize by being exposed to Western culture and values. But it seems like just the opposite. Westerners seem to bend to authoritarianism instead of in the name of profits. Was the promise of globalization a lie? Okay, I say recently, but my friend Connor knows I've been pushing this topic off for quite a while. But we finally it's happening. Yeah, so to give you a little bit more backstory to the rest of you all, John Cena was doing press for F9 or Fast 9, I guess. And he said something about Taiwan, you know, like actually being a country, right? That seems pretty chill. Not chill of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Fast and Furious franchise is very lucrative, and it makes most of its money, vast majority of its money, in China, right? So he pissed off the CCP, and immediately backpedaled. A big tough guy, John Cena, immediately backpedaled from this. And there was a video of him speaking Chinese, like speaking Mandarin or something, and with surprising skill, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure if he knows any of it, but like he was actually pretty good. But anyway, so John Cena immediately reversed his course because he's insulted the Chinese Communist Party. So this seems to be another example, and there are many others, and I'm sure we'll bring it up later on, of how Westerners are bending to the will of this authoritarianism rather than as the problems we've heard of. Those countries, China, liberalizing because they want to do business with us. So, 1 minute intros for everyone, and we'll get started. Kat.
Yeah, I don't really. I guess it was part of the whole sell on like globalization, but I think it's honestly pretty naive and actually more than that, pretty fucking stupid to say like, no, bro, if they just see our ideas and like the Western money, they're just gonna change your mind, dude. No, pretty dumb. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, people will do whatever it takes to get a buck. Suck dick for tips, sure. Say Taiwan's not a country, hell yeah. Like at the end of the day, all that matters is that hey, I hear that 50% of our money comes from the international market, and 35% of that is China. And John Cena, I don't give a fuck if you have opinions. We will kick you off of this movie if you don't go and say sorry. So yeah, the things you do for $1.99. I don't know what to tell you. Selling yourself out's been the oldest career, and now we see it in a new method. Let's go.
Thanks so much. Killer.
For me, it's I mean, we're talking. I think this was true back in the older days. I mean, you gotta remember that like one of the famous pictures of Winston Churchill was like him giving the what's now known as the peace sign, but I believe that was a middle finger for back in those days to the English, and they were willing to stand their ground for their own morals and everything else. But when you follow a purely, I can't believe I have to sound like a socialist for a second, but a capitalistic system, they're gonna bend their knees towards whatever gives them a lot of money. And when you're talking about a country that has a vast majority, or not vast majority, but like a crazy amount of the world's population inside it, yeah, they're gonna bend their knees. They want that money. They want that. They just they want to be able to sell their products and stuff, and that country now has a say over it. We, as a society, can choose to stand by our morals, but a lot of people are gonna start bending or fading when you're talking about huge amounts of investment disappearing because we decide to piss off that country. And so it's about time that we actually start either standing by our own grounds, and the whole entire West and everyone that doesn't like China and what they're doing can actually change China's opinion, but we have to actually start standing together rather than, running around like squabbling chickens.
Thank you so much. Next. Counterpoints.
CTV.
No, I was going to say CCP. I was going to literally say CCP.
The federal government is bad. Drugs should be legal, and machine guns should be available in vending machines. That being said,
y'all better get the goddamn government out of my face now.
But specifically on this subject, yeah, I have not made. I don't think I have enough historical information in order to make a decision about whether or not, like, our decision in 1976 to normalize relations with China. I can't decide whether or not that's one of our worst blunders geopolitically. I'm wondering if there's like a long game that we're playing that I just don't understand. Where actually, so for instance, like China has been accused of currency manipulation. They're a developing economy. Apparently, their housing bubble is worse than ours. Apparently, a lot of the housing growth that they've had in their economy is substandard. So they literally just create crappy houses just for the sake of crappy houses. It's actually routine in China for like I think even like middle class people to own like 2 or 3 investment properties. And the truth is that the housing boom was so aggressive that people own 2 or 3 properties that nobody's renting because they have like an overage of housing. So I don't know if China is going to like collapse from the inside and then that's going to cause reform or what, or even if the Chinese people themselves are interested in any kind of reform. I'm very worried about a 21st century where we seem to be on the decline and China seems on the upswing, and I'm looking for reasons to not be alarmed. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much. Xenon.
As long as profit is part of the international conversation, the promise of globalization is always going to be a smokescreen to sell the people and the environment for corporate profit. And we've seen that time and time again, especially in the US with the various trade agreements, the TPP, and so on and so forth. And China's a little different because they're an economic powerhouse as well as being an iron-gripped authoritarian state, which keeps them from moving at all. They won't move because they also wield a giant economic carrot if you want to get access to those markets.
Great. So, I don't know. I think this was like sort of inevitable. China has so much like buying power and just capitalistic power that it was like inevitable that someone was going to say something against China and then like have to apologize because it's going to eat into profits. This is just inherent to the systems that like we currently associate with. And yeah, someone said earlier that like we can stand by our morals or we can do the profit motive thing. Everyone's going to do the profit motive thing. Everyone's going to grift. Everyone's just going to go for as much profit as they can get because it's completely incentivized in the system, and it's not going to matter what your morals are. So I don't know. I think this was like inevitably going to happen. It's a really bad thing that we're bending to like ultra authoritarian regimes. But ultimately, when like part of your living depends on it, I don't know. It seems unavoidable.
DemonMama.
Yeah. Now Americans are getting the feeling of what it's like to contend with an empire. Yeah, empires suck. It turns out like cultural hegemony can really, really suck. Unfortunately, we haven't really traditionally given much of a shit about that in America. Basically, America, despite priding ourselves on free speech and all of this nonsense that we talk about and virtue signal about, we don't actually have that very much, and we haven't really had that. We haven't had a culture established of independent artists or of artists' rights in any way. There is nothing for artists or performers, most of them, to really do, even rich ones like John Cena. There's not much they can actually do to protect their own free speech. They'll just get shit canned if they don't do exactly whatever the corporation says, which of course is going to be, like everyone else has said, what makes them the most money. This has happened many times, by the way. I mean, corporations do this all the time. We've seen it with everything from the memes of like the pride symbol going on to every Bethesda company except for the ones in countries that hate gay people, or whether it's censoring of episodes and of TV shows. There's all kinds of examples of this. We've done this for a long time ourselves, just so you know. Censorship in America is a huge problem, not usually in the ways that you hear it talked about. You usually hear about like YouTube and whatever. But I think that our culture of like complete disregard for artists and for the independence and autonomy of artists, and our unwillingness as a society to back up artists and to ensure their ability to, you know, speak their mind, even if they're criticizing a competing state or our own state for that matter, has put us in a really tough spot. And it's not going to get better, I don't think. So I think we're going to have to contend with China becoming an increasing power. And we have to address the problem with massive hegemonic structures that are highly capitalistic in nature, because when you have a society that is built so stringently, and I don't even think it's all necessarily all forms of capitalism, but I do think that capitalism trends this way. When you have a profit motive driving every decision, you are not going to get art. You are not going to get the genuine opinions of the people who create stuff, even wrestlers. And by the way, I know a lot about the wrestling industry. Wrestlers are in a real bad place when it comes to job security and retirement. They die. That's what happens. They don't retire. They die. And that means even some of the most famous ones in the world, like the Iron Sheik, thankfully didn't die, but almost did. And it was kind of YouTube that saved him, honestly. But yeah, so those are my takes on this particular issue. I don't think there's much we can do to solve this outside of our companies and corporations to increase artistic freedom, to encourage dissenting thought, but you're never going to convince a corporation to not bow down to a giant consumer market that is highly authoritarianly controlled. So yeah, there you go.
Thanks so much. And our friend DemonMama using artists in the absolute loosest sense of the word.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you not think John Cena is an artist? I think John Cena is an artist, like unironically.
I agree with DemonMama.
Yeah, I think he's like
DemonMama, you and I
artist.
were like this.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to wrestling, for sure. Listen, I have a lot of respect for wrestlers and
vegans.
I haven't.
Yeah, I have a lot. Well, yeah. Listen. I have a lot of respect for the vegan ideals. I don't really have a whole lot of respect.
I actually wasn't thinking of pro wrestling as artistry, but maybe I could see something like that.
Well, that's another conversation we could have.
We're lucky Dylan's not here. Holy shit.
Oh yeah, he's and John Cena is actually pretty amusing. At least he seems like actually pretty funny. But all right, moving past that, Layman, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't know what I did, but you're welcome.
Nothing.
Wonderful.
But
my presence is enough.
But
I love it.
I love you any which way.
I love you too, buddy. Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's not really much else I have to really say that hasn't already been said by quite a few other people. What happened with John Cena is quite terrifying to me. It's quite unnerving on the surface of it. But usually what I try to focus on is in equal measure to the problem. I try to focus on the solution of the problem. And with China being the way that it is and how morally maligned it is, I guess you could say, with a lot of liberal democracies that, I live in, you all live in, to my understanding. I don't really know what you do outside of reform out of trading with them and then finding alternative nations to trade with. Now that's very idealistic. But that's the most pragmatic thing I think you can do. I mean, it's very idealistic for the US. I think there's more potential with it in Canada because we don't rely on China nearly as much when it comes to trade. Most of our goods and services actually come from the US, which I would much rather trade with than fucking China. So yeah, as far as the US goes, I don't know, very idealistic. It's one of the few things trade-wise that I agree with. May God rest his soul, Endernax. Rest in peace, Endernax. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And one last thing, just before we get started with the open discussion, if you just found the stream while we've been talking, and you've been liking what you're seeing, hit that follow button right now. Hit that follow button. Make sure notifications are on because I do this 6 days a week. Don't want you to miss out. All right. Do that right now. All right, so please open discussion.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that China's complicated. I took a history class from a person who grew up there, lived there their entire lives. They literally came over to teach Chinese history at my local college. And it was actually incredibly interesting seeing it from their perspective because they basically been raised in the party and raised in the culture and kind of seeing somebody that you're told is an enemy explain their own history about themselves to you is kind of enlightening because the way that Americans will kind of whitewash a Native American genocide or basically slavery or something like that was the same way that this person was I don't want to say whitewashing, but kind of pulling their critical punches around events like Tiananmen Square, the Cultural Revolution, the early revolution, the Long March. This teacher was so ingrained in Chinese culture that she was actually shocked that Americans had not heard of the Great March, which for those of you who don't know, the communists were almost purged out of existence. They walked allegedly 10,000 miles over the course of a year or something like that. 10,000 is probably incorrect, but they walked a really fucking long way in really harsh terrain. I think 60 to 70% of them either abandoned the revolution or died during the Great March, but then the hardened cadre became the vanguard party under fucking Mao Zedong, who then ended up taking the country. And then also specifically when it comes to Taiwan, for those of you who are unaware, Taiwan is where the nationalist government that at one time was in charge of all of China, they were so corrupt and ineffectual in resisting the Japanese that the communists basically came in behind the Japanese war effort, killed the Japanese and then also absorbed nationalist forces that were disorganized and shattered by their battles with the Japanese, and also disheartened at how incompetent and ineffective the nationalist government was. Well, the nationalist government was so incompetent and so ineffective that they basically ceded the entire country to the communist government, escaped to Taiwan, and took a lot of national treasures with them. They actually raided a lot of the museums that were in Beijing, and I want to say Nanking as well, and basically took anything that wasn't nailed down to Taiwan. So for China, it's actually kind of like a point of contention that the nationalist government is this leftover, corrupt, capitalist holdover from 70, 80 years ago, in that their aspirations are eventually to re-seize China. So that always puts Taiwan and China in flux. And then also it's kind of like China's long-term goal, if I understand it, at least from the teacher, to eventually have the one China policy implemented, which is part of the reason why the United States plays into that, is they want a unified China. They want Hong Kong returned to them. They want Taiwan returned to them. They want to have a unified geographic polity known as China that includes all of their historical territories. And I think I hit it there long enough for the history, so I'll leave it there. But needless to say, like China, knowing your geopolitical enemy is incredibly interesting because you can understand their motivations without thinking that they're uniquely evil while still thinking they need to be fought.
Okay. All right. So, anyone else?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it's like so much a matter of like, at least my perspective on this. I don't really know how you tackle issues of like art or artist censorship on like a federal or international level. I think that's very, very difficult to actually do. I don't think, and I recognize that you did preface it, Layman, by saying that like it's a bit idealistic to think that we're not going to trade with one of the biggest countries on the planet. I mean, the biggest country on the planet, right? Or yeah.
For me, it's like the big thing is that it's like so economically powerful, right? That like I'm not saying that it's not something that anybody should like strive towards or aim towards. I'm just saying that the idealism that comes from it is just that like it seems like something that would happen like way far into the future if we were to pursue that. That's all I'm saying. It'd be really hard to do that without like displacing a lot of people's economic circumstances back at home, at least in the US context, from what I understand.
My concern with this sort of thing is that I think that there will always be like sort of not always, I mean in our current state, I think that like highly powerful economic superpowers are going to like attempt cultural hegemony in many ways. We do it all the time. Again, we've done this stuff for a very long time.
Hate it when you fucking people do it. God.
Yeah, I mean, me too. Me too.
You know?
It really bothers me when the U.S. does this sort of thing. But like the thing is that I guess blame the anarcho philosophy leaning in me, but I think that the answer to this sort of thing is organizing differently. I think that if you end up working for a mega corporation and creating your art for a mega corporation, which is going to be a lot of people, chances are you are going to have to bend on your principles all the time because it's about money and they will again shit can you. I think the solution to this in the past, or at least a solution to this, was that we had robust public arts funding that really, in some cases it did introduce certain levels of censorship and cultural hegemony, but it also provided for a lot of independent art where people could speak their minds and these ideas could be handled by discussing and artistic responses or analysis or critique or whatever. But you can't really do that when the only thing that matters in the production of most art in the modern era is at the hands of giant mega corporations. That is a huge issue, and we're never going to get. I don't feel like we can get over that problem. If it's not China, it'll be somebody else.
Mama, I have a question along this line of thinking. like so for me, my impulse or instinct or understanding is almost the exact opposite. Like YouTube in general is one of like YouTube, social media, Tumblr, DeviantArt, like all that kind of stuff. These are some of the like most powerful artistic platforms that we've seen in history. Now it's really difficult to make a living, I understand that, but some of the most like talented artists, I'm literally thinking of Siame Peterson. He's somebody who created like a Hollywood quality 3D animation that he did by himself in his off time. Now he's employed by Games Workshop. It's one of the greatest artistic pieces that I've seen in the past like 10 or 20 years that would not have even been, if we were talking about like even I'm curious about I'll wrap it up. I'm curious about what you're saying about public funding of the arts that are independent. I'm curious about what you mean by that because I don't know any historical examples.
Well, I mean, you can't really have I mean, okay, so there's two ways of looking at this. You can't really have our traditional like NPR and educational system based solutions for public art and have no influence from the government. That's just not reality. Obviously, like by the nature of the fact that it's being issued by the government. I do think that turning our mind towards like communal or shared projects or co-op projects for art would probably be a huge deal. Also, I find it interesting that you bring up Tumblr here, and I mean that genuinely. I agree with you that Tumblr was in many ways it was many things, but in one thing, it was a sort of golden era of art in many ways.
We're moving way far away from topic.
Yeah, we are.
Well, I don't know. We're talking about artistic independence.
Are we? I was okay.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, okay.
Okay, sure. Let's go. We have a new entrance into the field. We have Stoic Viper. Hello, hi. Kat says you have lots to say on this topic. We'd love to hear it.
Okay, so we're still on the topic of Taiwan, I assume, and John Cena, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Topic 2. Yep. Okay. Cool. So I guess my thoughts on this are that I honestly don't like that John Cena apologized for his prior comments. I do think it was a bit weak on his part. However, I just want to also mention something that I think a lot of people don't really understand when it comes to the whole, whether Taiwan is to be part of China proper, like People's Republic of China or part of the Republic of China itself. I think that people forget that there's actually an independent Taiwanese movement. Like at the moment, for example, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the current party in control of Taiwan, doesn't really identify either with the Kuomintang's Republic of China vision, which is essentially, that we're the original China and that, the People's Republic of China has occupied our land. So we're just now over here, but we'll one day return to the mainland. And it doesn't agree necessarily with the People's Republic of China's vision, which is, of course, Taiwan's simply a part of the PRC, and that it has this kind of like a third way, if you want to call it that way, where it's not the Republic of China, it's not the People's Republic of China either. It's Taiwan itself, like its own independent Taiwan. And I think that it's a good, I honestly would go with that third way, because I think that this whole debate over whether Taiwan should be a part of the People's Republic of China or should just be like the Republic of China, I think that kind of like is a bit outdated, and as demonstrated by the rise of, as I mentioned, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the current ruling party in Taiwan. So I think that people should kind of recognize that Taiwan is its own thing. It's not the Republic of China, it's not the People's Republic of China. Now, as I guess for the whole, where's the promise of globalization lie? I don't think so, because globalization has sort of brought a lot of people out of poverty. It's made the world more interconnected. It's opened up trade and so on. But I do think that there is this kind of element of ignoring some of you could say, the pitfalls of some authoritarian regimes that we do business with. And I do think that we should be able to address those pitfalls while trying to make a kind of like a balance between business and ethics in that regard. So those are kind of like some of my thoughts on the matter.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, what do y'all think? Okay, great.
I don't know. I wish I knew more about it. I wish I knew more about it to comment. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's interesting, but
so yeah. So I think My focus of this is less like the individuals, right? And what we see, right? Like, cause like how much can we expect for a John Cena to be able to do any of this, right? To be able to push back, right? Like the market forces are what they are, right? Instead, like our largest societal trends, I think, is what we should be looking at, right? And our powerful institutions, and see how they are reacting, right? Now you can say Hollywood's a powerful institution, but yeah, I think like these overall trends, and you see them again and again. When push comes to shove, it's not that China goes, "Oh wow, the Americans in their Western way of life, that's really gotten us," and they've got that fat cash, right? Those fat wallets. Then we'll move to like. I think look at all. If you're looking at the major contention points we have with China, it seems like we are capitulating to them. Maybe I'm having a too narrow of a view of this, and it's a possibility, but it seems like we end up capitulating to them constantly, just like on a national level and on this corporate level, right? This corporate market forces level, and it seems obvious that would happen because under capitalism, yeah, you go for profits, and China's a massive market, and so you do what they say.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to point to someone else?
I'm not sure if Freezing I want to say something. If not, then we'll go to you.
Yeah, really quick. Yeah, Prime, you're pretty much correct. It's all about the money. That's what it all boils down to, and that's what drives our government. The corporations, the rich, own the government. Therefore, it's all about the profit. And I'd also like to say to what DemonMama was talking about, the issue with artists and stuff like that. In the FDR era, they had a federal writers program or something like that, which went to support artists and things like that. Maybe I think they were setting up in some cases like communal areas for artists to live in and that sort of thing. So we could definitely do that. And UBI is a strong way to support that. Universal healthcare, education, and all those sorts of social programs can support artists and Twitchers and bloggers and things like that.
Let's go to Killer first, and then we'll go to Layman.
Okay. Killer?
Can't hear you, buddy.
He's working on it. All right.
No, don't worry.
Man,
Pro
this team
streamer
is
over
really
here.
good with mics.
Yeah, holy shit, we're doing wonderful here. No, the problem with I think there's not very much contention because I think people, including capitalists, understand this problem of capitalism, which is like capitalists in general are very short-sighted. If you can make an easy buck, that's what they're all about. The thing with communists, or I don't want to necessarily call China communistic because it's kind of, they're a little bit wishy-washy in those sense, right?
State capitalist.
Yeah, they're just weird.
God damn it, guys! Like,
We're not
Don't-
moving.
don't-
No. We're
Let's not
saying
get
they're
into
not
this.
pure
every
capitalists.
fucking
That's all
time.
That's all I'm saying. They're a little bit weird, but in the end of the day, they're a lot more long-sighted than what our capitalists are in our own country. What our country relies on purely is our own government being able to step in and go, "Fuck you, Microsoft and Apple and all these other companies. You're not doing this shit anymore. There are enemies, there are rivals, and we need to deal with this." Unfortunately, our government's not capable we can talk about our own governmental issues of doing so. You could say things like funding, or like these private companies funding our politicians to making these decisions and other things. At the end of the day, though, that's what our system relies on, is our own government stepping in, and currently it's not.
Let's go Layman, then Counter. And also, before we do that, Xenon, do you have like one last thing to say? I thought you were.
Yeah, really quickly about the. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I think
The economics of this. Yeah, we lost so many jobs
we have an
because of
echo.
the.
We have an echo somewhere.
You're not
you
muted.
gotta
You're
mute.
not
Mute in
muted in the
StreamYard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Try it again.
We all had the same opinion at the same time.
Xenon.
Xenon, now we can't hear you at all.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah.
You should probably leave the Discord and then come back. I can move you back in.
Oh, okay. Well, then do that. Okay. He will be back in a second, and don't want to move on from yet. Hopefully, he'll jump back into the. Okay. All right. We'll just move on. All right. Go ahead, Layman.
Okay. I guess I was gonna Prime. I think you said earlier something about like whether or not you think like China might be capitulating to a lot of things from the U.S. I think that it's probably reciprocal, because aren't the U.S. and China like about the same in economic power? Like how powerful they are, like geopolitically. Like, I don't know, how different are they? Who has more? China has more than the U.S.
China has a fucking massive amount of power. They basically outlaw actually buying any property inside of China, so everyone invests in like outside sources. So they're all buying land out in other countries. They're also like they're making a whole bunch of trade deals with ports all across Europe to like basically own the ports and own like a part of the economy that goes through the ports. They're also like massively like helping Africa and like building a whole bunch of shit there that they can profit off of. They have massive amounts of geopolitical power that they've amassed over the last few years that no one said anything about because our president's been a dumb fuck. So
Yeah. So you would say then that compared to the United States, China has significantly more power, right?
I mean, in terms of GDP, I would say that they're similar. But in terms of like in the capitalist sense, like the amount of people that can buy things, then China has more power. So when we're talking about the international market for things like movies,
I'm trying to think like who, like, yeah, because like because like I know within trade deals, like usually it's like sort of like a reciprocal reliance on each other to a certain degree, and obviously how much one country might rely on the other country would be dependent on how much more economic leverage you have over that country. I just wanted to see like if it was significant enough with the U.S. versus China where it wouldn't be like a more reciprocal exchange, and it would be more sort of like China's definitely fucking the U.S.
Yeah, so, no, sorry.
no, China would fuck us over.
I was just trying to figure out.
God damn it, no. Okay, listen, we have about a 40% higher fucking GDP. We finish more finished goods. Our military power is significantly higher. Like by per capita, we're significantly fucking higher. And then on top of that, if we disappeared as a market who was willing to buy Chinese goods, the only people who can afford this shit is like fucking Western Europe, and Western Europe is going to follow us. Not only that, we're not just including our GDP as far as like American hegemonic power. When you're talking about us, you're also talking about Western Europe, the Commonwealth. You're talking about, basically a whole bunch of unilateral relationships with geopolitical satellites of China, like Thailand and Vietnam and Japan and all that kind of stuff. All people who and India, by the way, who all use us as a counterweight against China. So no, like, yes, if they stop making our little plastic fucking trinkets, we're probably fucked, but we would figure it the fuck out. The reason why, sorry, I'll be really quick. The reason why this is so concerning is because they might be 40% lower than us in GDP, but they have a lot of local industry, a lot of local manufacturing, a lot of shit that is inside the country. So they have like actual raw product and raw materials that they can produce. So if they decided, like during COVID, where they just said, hey, we're not selling you medical supplies anymore, the entire world has to scramble to create their own medical supplies because like half of the shit that's in the world is manufactured in China.
But like, do we really have as much power as we think? Because people have been like, no, I mean, like the whole thing of like people have been complaining about China for years, saying that there's a problem in China. A lot of people have a problem with like a lot of the like lack of rights, etc. A lot of people have a problem with a lot of the outsourcing. But it's more important to companies that they're going ahead and saving pennies on the dollar as opposed to going ahead and actually fulfilling their ideological mandates. So as much as it's like, yeah, okay, if we pull out of China, yeah, we can go ahead and we can manufacture our own plastic trinkets, but will we? Like,
no, of course not. And like this is where I want to concede to your point. So like oftentimes what's frustrating for me when I talk to like Western hegemonic idealists or whatever, is they think that like we are going to pull out of trade relationships or militaristic relationships because people do bad things. No, that's not going to happen. We are boys with some of the most nefarious twats on the fucking planet. All right. Saudi Arabia as a fucking example in particular, where they're just like, they are, Saudi Arabia is everything that we talk shit about other countries as pretext to invade them, but they're our boy. So like, nah, like it's kind of like I think it was like Cuba. There was like Batista or some shit who was like running Cuba. He was like the dictator in like the 20s or 30s. Where I want to say it was like either Teddy Roosevelt or something like that. He was like, Batista is a fucking bastard, but he's our bastard. That's American geopolitics.
Let's go to.
Can I quickly just
It's geopolitics, period.
Stoic, please.
Yeah, I just want to quickly interject here just a bit. I just want to say that part of the reason why, for example, China's even engaged in the Belt and Road Initiative is it's trying to get out of its own economic bubble that's created throughout the 2000s. So it's finding this way of trying to get out of it by making all these trade deals with different African states or with even European states as well. It's all to try to get out of this economic bubble that it's been able to build over the 90s and 2000s. Because Jintao, for example, who was the former, you could say, I can't remember, head of the party, basically, he was a bit more pragmatic than Xi Jinping, basically, is quite now. So I think that we just have to understand that despite China's increasing economic influence throughout these different states, and rightfully so, I think someone pointed out the debt-based diplomacy that's engaged in, we have to remember at the end of the day that China heavily relies on outside forces, like it heavily relies on, for example, the United States and Europe for business and for all these other kind of stuff. And that if, for example, the United States or even other European states were to make alternative economic arrangements, this would screw over China quite heavily.
Yes.
So as we just have to remember that the Belt and Road Initiative is its way out of this economic bubble, ideally. Whether it works or not,
yes,
that's another thing.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. That's what I was sort of getting. I was alluding to something like that earlier too in my opening when I was talking about like ideally, what's the word? Reforming out of trade with China would probably make China weaker. Because like, if all those countries that Viper just said just tomorrow stopped trading with China and were able to sort of like supplant that economic desire with some other nations, then China would be a lot weaker as a result. So like free trade is like a reciprocal relationship, right?
I guess I'm just a little.
I'm
just a little confused as to how this ties back to the whole John Cena situation. Like, I feel like the panel is very war hawkish with regard to China. If there's going to be a war between two, imperial powers, it's not going to be like a pretty affair if we're going to talk about this in terms of like, oh, they're our enemy, which I've heard that rhetoric used a lot on this panel so far. I guess if we're talking about just raw geopolitics, I have no idea. Like, there's so many factors and things that could change. I don't know what the approach is. I don't know that you'd even be able to get American corporations to go along with protectionist trade policies with regards to China. But
well, can I ask you about that then? Because
who's suggesting war?
Excuse me, DemonMama. Previously, you were talking about protecting artists, right, and giving them the room to say what they want to say. Correct? I want to make sure that's what you said, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well then, how do you protect them if they are working within a corporate structure, right? So if they're working within Hollywood, and we don't have in any way.
Oh yeah, I don't think there is a way. I think that's a pipe dream. I think that like that is just a reality that we have to grapple with, which is that if the entirety of art or the entirety of media is produced by hyper massive corporations that are international and don't actually have a national border, or they have a sort of loose alignment. They're basically, you have the Disneys, which I'm sure Disney would be very, very sad if they, if America was to go into decline, but they'd realistically just build up elsewhere, or they'd, have a line that's way further than most people as far as what they're willing to endure in the name of continuing to make profit off of the people of China and whatever. But I think that we need to, like, I don't know. I guess it depends on what you're talking about. If we're talking about how to win a trade war with China, I have no way. I can't tell you anything about that. I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if anybody can do that. But if we're talking about how do we like change the culture towards art, how do we prevent hegemonic entities from like coming down on and censoring and influencing our media and our art, I think that the way that you do that is by investing through many different avenues into legitimately, or at least as independent as possible, media and art production. those things have to be enabled, and and it has multiplicative benefits. It's not just beneficial in regard to foreign powers that might want to exert cultural hegemony, but it also helps with domestic. It makes it so that we're capable of actually producing art that's critical of our own government, that's critical of our own systems, and also that people don't live entirely fraught lives. This is why I was talking about before some of the things, but again, it seems like this is very much geared towards a sort of how do we win a trade war with China. I don't think anybody's gonna win out of that. I feel like most people, like the John Cenas of the world, who we were originally talking about, and other artists, like even ourselves, are along for the ride. There is very little that we can even do with regard to even our votes, with regard to how we will fare in an all-out trade war with China. I think that if we're going to talk about that aspect, I mean, how do we protect somebody like John Cena? Well, their corporation is not going to do it, so somebody else has to. Either we have to find a way to convince people in the government to set aside funding to allow for, I don't know, like a competitor to some of these industries. I mean, we've had that in the past. We've had a huge amount of money that was invested into schools, public art via public arts, and those schools would protect the freedom of speech of their of the artists that worked with them, or that spoke for them, or whatever. But we don't really have that as much anymore. We have a bunch of media powerhouses that produce Marvel films, and those Marvel films are inevitably going to fall to censorship if there's a big enough buyer, and there is. So I think that like there is a value beyond just a discussion about a trade war in discussing how we make art, how art is distributed, how like the people who make art and who make and not just art. We could talk about this like political speech, all kinds of forms of speech. I think we have to have a serious look at. But yeah, I don't know if that's not the way the topic's going to go. Then I don't know. So yeah.
I would love to respond to that directly.
Sure, please.
This is as democratic as it's gonna get. Like seriously, like I'm not kidding. We have Patreon, we have Subscribestar, we have like all these like we have Kickstarter, we have all these crowdsourced art projects, and on top of that, you can say whatever the fuck you want. I could say Jeffrey Epstein is a goddamn lizard fucking pedophile who eats goddamn babies, and I could fucking say that right now, and I just did, and nobody's gonna come kill me in the middle of the night, probably, unless people start taking me seriously. So Jeffrey Epstein is a lizard person who eats babies, and if I convince enough people that Jeffrey Epstein is a lizard people who eats babies, then I can get dozens of people to support me economically with like $5 a month. And on top of that, we've seen this in economics of scale. Every single person in this room right now, if they're accepting any level of revenue, is a form of artist. As a matter of fact, I think at least two of you are independently, like you are able to pay your bills with your art. So this is kind of the thing where it's like you're saying, like,
yeah, absolutely.
We need to think, well, last point.
We
need to think about how we structure society so independent artists feel free to say what they want, and they can get financing from areas that aren't beholden to like the media superstructures of our country. This is about as good as it fucking gets. Like I don't know how any more how much more free
I disagree
could you make
super
society?
big, like on almost everything that you've said. So first of all, okay, I mean we can go into this. This is definitely a different angle than I was approaching with, but I can talk about this real quick. So first of all, yes, it is true that there is at least two of us on this panel who are able to make a living off of our art that we put out on the internet. But I implore you to look into the stats of how many people actually make art on these platforms and how many are able to make money with it. They might be producing things that are perfectly good, that are really, really amazing, but because of the way that the everything from the algorithms to the amount of cuts that are taken by the corporations, this is not some kind of democratic, this is just a new model for the internet era of the exact same things. And we're seeing people get wrapped into exclusionary release clauses and all kinds of the same exact stuff that we've seen. And while it is indeed great for somebody like myself to be able to make money on something like Patreon or whatever, that it's simply not true that all types of people are going to be able to do that. There is art that is literally banned on Patreon that you will get your Patreon taken down for. I mean, literally just like things that we would consider even relatively vanilla with regard to sex.
Do we owe every aspiring artist a living through their art?
I mean, okay, hold on a second. Now we're getting into a really big question, because I think we owe everyone a living. But that's the purpose of a society, in my opinion. A society is to meet the needs of the people that belong to that society. And therefore, I think that we should build societies that meet all basic needs. But that is a very, very big question. And I don't think that like Patreon Corporation owes every single artist money. But in a broader, when we're talking something so big as geopolitics and art censorship, and how China can just basically grab John Cena, the American superhero, by the balls and make him apologize. I mean, I think that that's like a pretty big question, and that it reveals some big flaws in the way that we look at the creation of art, and the way that we do, and the way that we look at speech in general. And I think that basically, I don't buy the idea that this is as democratic as it will ever be. I don't think that it's as democratic as it's ever been. I just think that more people have the internet, which means that by an unrelated structure, people are able to get out there. You talked about this a little bit with Tumblr.
I don't see these things as unrelated. So for instance, like I don't view you kind of said like free speech in quotations during your opening or whatever. I don't view the First Amendment and what we're capable of doing on the internet as unrelated. I see them as completely philosophically interlinked.
I'm very confused as to what you're saying.
Okay, so what I am saying is that you're saying like this isn't as free as we get. I don't know how the fuck we get more free. Like I legitimately fucking don't. Like maybe economically, so if we were to get into like a post-socialist utopia where like automation and fusion power made it so people didn't have to work in order to maintain society, maybe at that point we can fucking fund every fucking artist or some shit.
What are you talking about?
I think it's legit. I think what you
sound insane.
I don't sound insane. You sound insane to me. I think the worldview that you advocate
like you're just,
for is legit.
You're just going off on some random thing that I've known.
I'm not. It's completely related to what you're talking about.
I understand what CounterPoints is saying. What you're saying is basically the society you want to build is pretty much only available post-scarcity. We can't just fucking provide for everyone at this point. We don't have the resources to do it at this point. It is possible maybe in the future with like gay space luxury communism when we fucking go harvest other fucking like planets and shit. Like maybe
what we are witnessing on this panel yet again is a limitation of small minds.
It's the limitation of resources, and you're not going to acknowledge that we don't have the resources to do it, and we're just going to shit people down.
Are you fucking insane? Are you people? Wait, hold on. No. It's my turn. I've gotten fucking talked over and interrupted and shut down like 15 times.
Okay, DemonMama.
Wrong.
More than the entire panel than anyone else. Holy shit.
DemonMama, you can finish your point.
Cool. I mean, I have a lot of points I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna take my time here because I dare you. I will bet you $100. Let's time it out, Connor.
$100 right now. Your fucking DemonMama's community.
Yep.
Time every time that DemonMama talked versus when I talked, and find out who talked for fucking longer. I will 100% pay $100 to whoever talked the fucking most. You fucking know balls to me with this bet the first time that we talked, and I didn't have the confidence to call you out on it. 100%. You have talked more than anybody else on this fucking panel. Yeah, and I don't think you're going to win it tonight. I almost 100% guarantee you will not win it tonight.
Okay, great. Let's go. DemonMama.
Big words.
Start now.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, the idea that like you have to have a post-scarcity society in order to offer any sort of solutions for public funding of the arts or communal funding of the arts is absolutely insane. That's absolutely insane. That is literally what you
the argument, and that was not what we said.
I am. Am I go? I'm very sorry.
I'm sorry, but I'm not going to
literally
be
just said. Okay. Let's rewind. We could literally rewind the VOD and watch you say that the world that you're advocating for is one where there's a post-communist gay space communism. This is ridiculous. You just can't. You can't back up your obnoxious hyperbole.
So you went from we can only achieve this post-scarcity to we can't give any fucking concessions to anyone ever in society. That's where you just went. That is so fucking insane to me. Oh, and so bad faith. What the fuck was that argument? Oh my god. My brain is splitting.
Then why couldn't you talk to Ben Shapiro like this?
Demon.
Because this was 2 years ago and I did not have the debate skills.
Demon.
All right.
Whew. Yeah. So, Like where do I even go
Incredible
from here? This has just
walkway.
been an incredible walkway. Wait, real quick, Danny. Can you explain what I walked back? I want you to outline my point because I think you're literally talking out your ass right now.
So I said that the society that you describe is only available post scarcity. You then turned that argument into we can give no concessions to anyone ever. That's what you did.
Okay. So I'm sorry. So you're accusing me of being the bad faith one when you summed up the argument I've been laying out here as the only type of society we can aim for is one that is available post-communism. I would argue that you are being bad faith and weren't actually listening to my argument because I never once argued that we need to give money to every single artist. I explicitly stated that yes, in the long term, when CounterPoints brought this up in the long term, it'd be really great if we could give a living to every single person. That's what I think we should build society towards. But once again, obviously, you weren't listening. I don't know, I don't know what your angle is here or whatever. But
apparently, we just have different brains because we both heard
totally.
different
we definitely have
things.
we definitely have different brains.
We
definitely have different brains,
shit.
and one of us was using them to pay attention, and the other one was zoning out. Okay. So
one of us completely took one of our arguments.
One of us is literally incapable.
Completely misframed it and tried to be a bad faith piece of shit.
I mean,
That's what.
Okay.
Oh, bad faith!
Great,
oh my god!
Great.
Hold on. I'm just going to point out real quick, Prime. I'm sorry. I'm just going to point out that literally for this entire topic, every single time I've even tried to make a single point, someone, including yourself, Prime, has interrupted me to shut me down. I'm just going to point that out. Like I'm actually getting a bit irritated with the state of this panel because I don't even know what anybody's talking about anymore. And it just seems to be like, oh, I don't know. We're going to talk about an extended lecture about the history of China. And then I try to say something that's very relevant to the creation of art. And then it just gets shut down. Okay, whatever. Have your panel.
I like tears.
All right. So we'll go to Caruana. He's been waiting. And then we'll go to Fiasino.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was going to say that when it comes to media figures and for any type of artistic endeavor, may be anything. It really just seems that once you get to a certain point, like your craft is no longer really your own. Especially when it comes to the circumstance of this, it's almost like if you step outside of a certain box, you don't really have autonomy that a lot of other people happen to be afforded. You can see this when it comes to things like Colin Kaepernick. The second that anyone says what they actually believe, it's like, that's nice, but like, that's not your job. Your job is to kick ball and do sport ball big good. And when now we're talking about this, a lot of people do recognize the sovereignty of Taiwan, but like it's not his job to sit there and say anything that's actually in his mind. His job is to sit there like a mindless drone and be like, yes, we will have fast car in the movie. My role is to do the big boom. No, I don't have opinions. Thank you. Please go see movie. There will be Lady with Booba. And like, that's essentially your only purpose. And that's pretty unfortunate that once you get to a certain point within the public eye, anything that you say is going to be consistently scrutinized, and especially when you are essentially contracted by something like Warner Bros. Or whoever the fuck produced this movie. It's even chopped down exponentially more. If you think ContraPoints has a hard time on Twitter, imagine being fucking John Cena. Say anything. Say that you like avocado toast. It's over for you, hoes. And it's really strange. I don't understand why, essentially, once you get to this certain point, you're essentially just a personality for hire. And you no longer are really able to have very many opinions of your own. And I think this is a really gross representation of such a phenomenon.
Zia?
Oh man, the muted people today got me torqued, boy.
Is he actually muted or is he having trouble with his
No,
Discord?
I think you're having audio
I
trouble.
feel so bad for Xenon.
Yeah.
He's like so chill, and then he just gets muted like crazy.
Ah.
He's like, oh no, I was wrong.
Xenon, hop out and then hop into another one.
No!
I'm literally gonna keep my eye on it. Okay. Yeah, let me get him. He actually did it quickly this time. Okay.
Try it again.
Technology has broken this, man. We need anarcho-primitivism to save.
I'm not hearing him.
Anarcho-primitivism is based, and we should go back to monkey. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
I
so
I
down.
want to live a simple life.
Xenon's on the fucking urge.
Yeah,
okay?
sorry. But yeah, we still can't hear you. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
Xenon.
Xenon, you might want to go ahead and look at your audio settings because it might just be like a mic issue.
Holy shit, Demon Mama, that looks
but-
good.
But I believe in you, right?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. That's my contribution.
Sure. All right. So I think that. Sorry, go ahead. Were you gonna say something? Okay. I think that this conversation, so my original intention for this conversation was to expand it not just from the John Cena incident, because there's been many such incidences, right? So where was the NBA, where there was the assistant coach of the Texas team, who said something about free Hong Kong, right? And then the immediately abandonment by everyone in the league, right? Including some people who are considered progressives or loved by the left, like LeBron James, right? Just immediately, oh no, sneaker sales in danger, abort. So there's that. There was the incident, as someone pointed out in the chat earlier, with Blizzard. And again, it was a Hong Kong thing. So the company Blizzard, the video game company Blizzard, during a Hearthstone tournament, someone said something about Hong Kong, and it was pretty much benign. Then they immediately got shut down and like tossed out of the league or something like that. It was a whole thing.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Oh, great,
Yeah,
great.
Welcome back.
And I'll finish this, and then we'll go up straight to you. So that was that incident. There was another one that was off to my tongue now. I'm forgetting. But there's been just a series of this. There was when the retailers, the clothing retailers, tried to stand up to Hong Kong, at least for stand up is even in quotes, big quotes, right? But made statements about how they're treating the Uyghurs, right? How they're treating the Uyghurs, right? They made those statements, and then China retaliated, taking them off of like search engines, right? So you couldn't find those retailers anymore. Like, couldn't find their sites. And I think the other stuff to them as well, but like then they immediately capitulated, and they also did the thing where the retailers then they made parallel statements. So they said one thing to the Western audience, and then another thing to China. It's like, oh no, like we don't believe that. No, we're all about that Uyghur cotton. So there's just so many instances, and those are the ones I think off the top of my head. I guarantee you there are more. And then there are ones that we don't even hear about, right? There's the ones that we don't talk about. There's Facebook, the CEO, it's Zuckerberg, right? Like running with like the head, like the chief technology minister in China, right? Running with them, like jogging on the streets of Beijing, talking about how great it is, right? Like it's smog with smog, right? But just begging to go in there, right? There's Google at first saying, we will do no evil, right? And like making a stance against China, but then the money got really good, and those things wiggled, right? And a lot of this their decision making changed when they saw how much money everyone else was making. So in the face of that, right, for instance, what DemonMama said previously, is that fair? It's pretty much impossible, and that at least this specific lie. So Stoic made a point earlier that globalization promised a lot of things, but like this specific promise from globalization, that seems to be a straight up complete lie, or at least something that just is an impossibility. So we'll go to Xenon first, and then we'll go to Counter, because he asked it.
Can you hear me now?
Speak, King. Speak. You sound sonorous, King. You sound sonorous.
Okay.
I thought it was sonorous.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
No.
Fuck off.
Come on, we gotta go.
No.
Sorry.
Well, neither do I. I heard
we
it
gotta
in
go.
fourth grade.
Xenon, go.
Okay, so yeah, we can support writers and artists. We've done it before through FDR and the writers program, but it requires that level of spending, that level of social spending, like the New Deal, which is, we need that sort of spending right now to fix a lot of our problems anyhow. So we can do it. Again, UBI, universal healthcare, education, and like communal living. We can do that. It's not that we can't. That's all I wanted to say.
Counter.
Yeah, so I understand like the impetus or the fear. So my long-winded historical rant about China is actually very specifically aimed at you have to understand like probably the past 500 years worth of history in order to understand China's position right now. And what I mean by that is that probably even before the Greeks, China was a semi-continuous empire with a meritocratic imperial aristocracy, and was it was like the sun that all its vassal states orbited around, whether that was like Thailand, Japan, the Koreas, like all that kind of stuff. So in order to understand how, where they are right now in their position in the world, you have to understand how great they were considered in the past. When Europeans first showed up in order to talk to China, the Chinese saw them as like smelly barbarians who just wanted their shit. So they basically made them beg in order to get into Chinese markets. The century of humiliation, I want to say, started in like the 1820s or something like that, 1850s, and that was with the Opium Wars between the United Kingdom and China, in which the United Kingdom and European powers basically carved up China for itself. Carved up Chinese markets and forced them to take European goods in exchange for what Europeans wanted out of China. And it was only with the Communist Revolution in 1948 that China got any kind of autonomy away from European or Western powers. And so up until now, they have been slowly building out their power structure to reassert their previous preeminence on the global stage. So there might be like a dual power negotiative, like a bipolar world between China and the United States going forward. And they might not be as imperial as the United States. They might not be as adventurous. They might not want to be embroiled in militaristic conflict. They literally just might want to be the cultural, economic, and hegemonic world power that can literally just look at economies and those economies tremble. And that's kind of what we're talking about geopolitically. Is it better to create good relationships with those people now, or to force them to reform before they become powerful? And right now, with the normalization of relations since 1976, the cat might already be out of the bag. We might never be able to bring China to heel as far as like human rights abuses or the authoritarian governments. We might never be able to reform them or replace them because they're already too powerful to do anything about it.
Caroline?
I just never really understand the idea where people in the West really thought that, like, with globalization, people were going to see their ideas and be like, oh shit, son, I never thought of democracy, dog. That was crazy. Like, you really think that like your ideas and your media and everything else was so special that others across the world were going to see it and be like, oh fuck, I want to try that out? Like, no. Like, you're really not that goddamn special. Like,
bullshit,
like,
Katarana.
This isn't a Civ game where we can build our culture really high and just like take over cities. Okay, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I have to push up against this. If you look at the Middle East and North Africa, like our fast food shit is taking over the Middle East and North Africa.
That's called
if you
literally colonized the living shit out of North Africa. That's just
colonize.
No, sorry, give me that. Ooh, what is that? Ooh, you enslaved my people, nya. That's what I'm hearing more than anything right now, because that's literally
giving
like
them fast food. What the fuck are we talking about right now?
But no, not with fast food, but like the amount of like cultural influence that the West has over Northern Africa. What languages do they speak? A whole lot of fucking French, dog. Okay, like, and if you go and like speak to Algerians, like they can tell you up until like the 70s, like the French were like.
I have to apologize for the sins of the French because I refuse to do so.
Actually, can you CRTV harder, Daddy, and apologize for being white? I kind of need that.
I'm sorry for being white.
Days.
Okay, listen.
I apologize.
I'm sorry for being white and dominating world history for 400 years. I'm sorry.
I am Italian. Do I have to say sorry for being white?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw the way
Alright.
you were looking at Ethiopia. Don't even try me, good.
Wait, but didn't we get discriminated on for being swarthy in the United States or some shit?
Yeah, but you
Oops.
still took Ethiopia,
Absolutely.
so.
Yeah,
Doesn't this give
exactly.
me like some points or
Oh,
something?
also you ruled the entire. No, Italy. Get the fuck out of here! You ruled the entire known world for like fucking 1,500 years. You're the worst of all of us.
Okay, listen, we're not that bad, all right? It's fine.
But yeah, essentially, like, you know, sometimes people will say, oh, like, clearly, you know, globalization works, and you know, these regions are like kowtowing to you know, a lot of the globalization. Nah, dog, you've literally had your like hands in these areas for like 300 years. Like, it's not like crazy. Oh my god, Algeria likes McDonald's. Yeah, I mean, if France does it, then Algeria does it. If France does it, then Morocco does it.
Okay, but
Like,
how do you square this for instance, like, so if we're to assign democracy to the West, which I think is a stretch, but whatever. If
yeah, I
we're to
wouldn't say that, but yeah.
but if we're to stretch like representative democracy as like some kind of like historic cultural thing that stretches back to Greece or some shit, how do you explain like the pro-democracy movements in most Middle Eastern and North African countries, if not being culturally influenced by Western styles of government?
You think that that whole idea of we should have the right to assign some of the people in government is like a uniquely Western idea? Because I'm pretty sure like any kid on a playground could come up with that idea if you let them. Like it's really
Hell
not.
no.
No, I mean, like, it's really not that like unique of an idea. Like, I could sit there banging pots and pans together and be like, oh shit, how should we distribute this? Maybe we should vote. Like, it's really, it's not that hard to like go
Wow.
ahead. Like, and
Okay,
of course,
Katarana,
of course
like,
they saw the West
Dude,
doing it, but I wouldn't say that's a
10,000
globalization
years.
thing.
10,000 years of history disagrees with you right now. Like it's actually phenomenal how
Good thing I'm a
not popular this
physicist.
idea
I didn't tell you I could read. No, but
right,
yeah, I mean, sure, I would say that having Western influence, but once again, do you not think that as a result of these places being under the colonization of France and other types of Western countries, that some people didn't end up leaving the country for university and saw like, oh shit, they get to vote there? Like, that's not globalization. That's just called like being like, damn, grass is greener on the other side. Like,
That's
it's not
100% globalization. If somebody travels to another country for university and then they bring cultural imports back to their host nation, that's 100% a part of globalization.
I usually think of globalization in more of a marketplace type of thing, like more related to economics. So perhaps like
but okay,
definitions are
but
different.
all right, so I'm gonna like be a history nerd real quick, okay? So globalization is like viewed as like a 20th century phenomena. It is not. It is something that has been going on since like the colonial periods in which like people built navies and sent them out into other cultures. So so for instance, like Barbados, right? What are the European powers that like colonized Barbados?
England.
Okay. Yeah, so like that cultural interchange is actually because of like 5 century old like economic incentives. Some of them being like slavery and fucking sugarcane and coffee and tea
It
and all
seems
that
like
kind of
we're
shit.
a little bit like swapping the words like colonization and imperialism for like globalization, at least when we're going and thinking about a model that's older than 100 years ago, which I'm okay with the like interchanging, but like I guess at that point, then yeah, like fine, I could say that, okay, yeah, fine, globalization brought ideas. If we're going to go ahead and like say that colonization is somewhat analogous to this concept. But if we're not doing that, if we're thinking of it more of an economic standpoint, where it's just countries and countries working more together in terms of our markets, or companies going out and outsourcing some of their jobs to different areas, having different parts of their items being manufactured in other places, then I would not say that globalization solely would change culture to the extent that it seems like people really wanted to happen post Cold War. Like, maybe if they just see that communism not good, they'll see communism not good. You know, I don't.
They did
think,
say that.
Pardon?
They literally said that.
No, I think bullets and guns and bombs said that more than the actual speaking. I think a lot more the wars
in the
from-
Soviet Union.
Okay, that's cold, but I guess when we're talking about like Vietnam, there was a lot of fighting just to say I don't like your economic system, dog.
Okay. So if you have a last word on that, and then we're gonna move on. Nope. Okay, good. Anyway,
Okay.
so
Can I just quickly add one last point,
Sure.
just to what Kateran says, and then we can sort of move on. I just wanted to say I get where Kateran's coming from. I get where CounterPoints is coming from. I just wanted to add a caveat to like Kateran's statement there. I guess maybe this is a caveat, but this idea that economic liberalization would lead to political liberalization is what sort of like the underpinnings for this idea of bringing, you could say, China into the fold and opening up its markets, because this idea that, okay, if we just introduce them to free trade and, you know, to our economies, their system will change over time and will alter. Instead, what we had is essentially you could say the consolidation even more of the CCP over like it's sort of like a command-based economy essentially. And now we're like in this awkward situation now where, you know, the things that we ignored for the longest of time throughout the 90s and even throughout the 2000s, they're coming to the forefront now. And there's going to be loggerheads, and whether we resolve this through like kind of like a restarting of like normalization or not is another question together. So I think that, I don't necessarily buy into this idea that economic liberalization leads necessarily to political liberalization, because I always think about the China context, because that was the big thing, like, oh, open the markets, they should be able to change. They may have changed a little bit, but in terms of their whole like ideological structure, not fundamentally, in my opinion.
thanks.